G'day, mate. 40 here. We seem to have an active shooter situation in my neighborhood each of the last 2 days. A Jewish man has been shot and killed. Not shot. No one's been killed. So forgive me if I am a little bit rattled. Let's get a report here.
Separate attacks on 2 Orthodox Jews. They were both shot while leaving synagogues in the Pico-Robertson area within 24 hours.
Both victims survived the attacks. KTLA's Jennifer McGraw is live with the latest. Jennifer.
Sharon, Sandy, LAPD just releasing a press release just moments ago saying that they do believe, in fact, both shootings were related to one suspect. That is the very latest from the LAPD. We're in this neighborhood, you know, and there's a lot of confusion, obviously, a lot of concern about both of these shootings targeting Jewish people, and want this person caught. Helicopters overhead this Pico-Robertson neighborhood searching for possibly 2 shooters wanted for gunning down 2 Jewish men. The first shooting happened Wednesday morning at 8:20 on Shenandoah near Pico. A man was shot while leaving the synagogue. And the second day, just 2 blocks away, another man shot after leaving prayer.
This is a horrific hate crime. We have to find the criminals who perpetrated this act.
Police are investigating the relation of the 2, but to the Jewish community, they say the motive seems to be clear.
Who else would come out and specifically shoot someone coming from a synagogue, coming out of a synagogue at a time of prayer?
This, I feel, was targeted because they didn't ask for anything. Somebody just came out of the bushes, shot him, and ran away.
Vivian Eisenstadt lives nearby and spoke with one of the victims, who is well known around here.
He is really being very Jewish about it, very grateful. He keeps saying it's a miracle that nothing happened to him and that it was just a through and through, and you know, he just wants to move on, but he's just really grateful. He keeps calling it a miracle that both of them were through and throughs and didn't cause people to die.
But 2 in 2 days, Rabbi David Barron of Temple of the Arts says more needs to be done to protect our religious communities. He says many temples and synagogues have already been beefing up security.
It's incomprehensible to me. We can't live in a state of fear, and we can't allow these acts to create an environment of fear and restriction from our freedom to worship.
And police are still interviewing witnesses and looking through possible surveillance video to help lead to the arrest of this suspect. Anyone with any information should contact police. As for police presence, because of this situation, there will be a heightened security around the area. That's the very latest. We are
Okay, so traffic is obviously disrupted, helicopters, police all over the place. A lot of people have a hard time getting home to Beverly Hills, West LA, Pico-Robertson this evening. So second Orthodox Jewish man shot in 2 days in my neighborhood. Apparently the suspect is a white guy, and apparently the same suspect for both attacks. All right, Jewish Federation says no indication that either incident is a hate crime. Well, that's good to know. So the first shooting occurred Wednesday morning near the intersection of Shenandoah and Cascio Streets. So after this Orthodox Jewish man was coming out of synagogue, second shooting took place 24 hours later this morning near Pickford and South Bedford, about 2 blocks away. So the first shooting happened 10 a.m. Wednesday. Man in his 40s was shot in the back while walking to his vehicle. Second shooting happened this morning at 8:30 a.m. A Orthodox Jewish man was walking home, got shot in the arm. Both victims are alive, described seeing male shooting suspects and a sedan. Let's have a look here. Jewish Journal. Suspect is still at large, apparently driving an older model Hyundai sedan that's either black or brown. So victims are in stable condition. So white man wearing a black mask, black glasses, and a black sweater, armed with a 9mm handgun. And so the older model Hyundai sedan, either black or brown. So very unusual to have, Jewish men shot in Los Angeles, particularly in West Los Angeles. And this situation reminds me a little bit about the balloon story. Like, why did the balloon story just capture our imagination? Okay, the head Rabbi Ari Shaffir, who heads this modern Orthodox Yeshiva University Los Angeles high school, says that the high school is currently under a shelter in place as a precautionary measure. Students can't leave campus. But this story reminds me a bit about the balloon story. So the Great Spy Balloon Freakout New York Times articles, right? These are not a safe time to be a weather balloon. So Joe Biden is now admitting that U.S. military using very expensive equipment was shooting down things that were probably completely innocuous. The last 3 knockdowns, so maybe weather balloon, something like that. But why did we soar into some kind of full-blown balloon freakout? Right? Why did we go from 0 to oh my God so quickly? Because we are instinctively wired to worry about new risks and risks with a lot of uncertainty. So having, a gunman in the neighborhood, targeting Jewish men, Orthodox Jewish men, yeah, it's kind of an unprecedented situation in my neighborhood. Yes, I plan to go out for Sabbath. I plan to go to synagogue. But, this is also a pragmatic community. So if for some reason we're told to shelter in place, we will shelter in place. I can't imagine that we'll be told to stay home. So apparently, Ethan Ralph just got swatted by Mexican police. Thoughts and prayers for Ethan?
No. Yes. They call because they think it's funny because they know I'm on the air. And they think it's funny to see you guys come in here and mess with me. Yeah, it's live right now.
Okay, are you a YouTuber?
Yeah, I'm a YouTuber, yeah.
What is your page?
Well, I'm banned off official YouTube, but I could write it down maybe for you. Cozy.tv/Ethan Ralph. Yeah, I'm a YouTuber. That's what I do for a living, though, YouTube. They call in pranks and stuff to try to, get me in trouble.
So, right now, I think that you're very tipsy, okay? So are you smoking to the weed a little bit? Or maybe use drugs?
So allegations that Ethan Ralph was under the influence. So trying to stay on top of the shootings in my neighborhood of Orthodox Jewish men.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. We haven't taken a poll, but it's possible on this Thursday evening you may be wondering what the hell is going on in our country. There are so many unanswered questions, some of them lingering. How, for example, did senile hermit Joe Biden get 15 million more votes than his former boss, rock star crowd
primarily interested about what's going on in my neighborhood. Let's
Fear and concern in LA's largely Jewish Pico-Robertson neighborhood tonight after 2 consecutive shootings of Orthodox Jewish men in as many days.
Fox 11's Phil Schuman is there live. Phil, what did we just find out?
Well, we know that both shooting victims were approached by a gunman as they walked on the sidewalk here in the residential area south of Pico, leaving Orthodox synagogues, 2 of many in the area. Police initially said the suspects had 2 different descriptions, but now they're saying they believe it's the same man they're looking for in both shootings. This morning's shooting happened outside the Orthodox Jewish synagogue on Pico, known as the Pinto Center. The victim, a man in his 70s, was walking towards his car when a gunman, a white man in a black mask, shot him and drove off in an older model Hyundai.
It's definitely nerve-wracking. It's very scary.
Rabbi Avi Gruen works at the Pinto Center, grew up in this Pico-Robertson neighborhood.
I don't remember any other time in the past where we've had people in the community being shot at, especially leaving synagogue. So it's for sure definitely a lot of people are nervous about it.
You ever feel like a target because you're Jewish?
Not so much, but maybe now. In general, you feel pretty safe walking around here.
Not anymore. Yesterday morning, another shooting outside one of the many synagogues on Pico. Another Orthodox Jew, a man in his 40s, shot by a suspect described as an Asian male with a mustache. No vehicle description.
There aren't enough cops in the area, so we have to be fully
aware
of what's going on.
For now, the LAPD says the 2 shootings are not related, not necessarily hate crimes, which Vivian Eisenstadt says seems ridiculous. Eisenstadt lives in the neighborhood, is in the process of getting her CCW, a permit to carry a concealed weapon.
They're not stealing anything, and they're not holding them up for anything. They're just randomly shooting them and then jumping into cars. So what else could you deduce from that?
Other than that Jewish people are being targeted.
Yes.
Jew haters, one area resident said that's the best way to describe it. Now, again, since we recorded that story, Alex and Christine, the police literally within the past few minutes, as you mentioned, have updated that information to say that they believe the same suspect described as an Asian man with a mustache is the shooter in both instances, but no details on the vehicle. There are many cameras out on Pico, of course, and some in residential areas here, no doubt aiding detectives in their investigation. Major Crimes has taken over. The mayor's office is aware. The ADL is issuing a statement of concern, and the LAPD says they will be increasing patrols in this area immediately. Live in Pico.
Okay, so some of the more hysterical approaches to events like this, say, oh, Jewish lives are so cheap, but since World War II, Jewish lives have been incredibly expensive. So Jews enjoy the most prosperity and safety that we've ever had in all of 4,000 years of Jewish history, essentially living in the United States today. So initially the description was a white guy, now an Asian guy, and what the heck is going on here? So think about the balloon story and then think about this story. How do these threats go from 0 to, oh my God, so quickly? Because we're instinctively wired to worry about new risks and risks with a lot of uncertainty. This is New York Times column that I just read. So these floating balloons are being referred to as unidentified aerial objects. Officials admit they don't know if more of them are out there, so we tend to worry more about risks that remind us of things that we've already learned to fear, such as getting shot or nuclear war. Spy balloon comes amidst growing tension between the United States and China. Also, we have a new right-wing government in Israel that's highly unpopular around the world. Whatever goes on in the Jewish state is going to have repercussions to Jews walking down the street in Australia, Argentina, Brazil, France, Germany, England, all over the world. So the Chinese spy balloons that many people have been freaking out about, very much remind me from my history readings about 1957 when the Soviet Union launched Sputnik 1. That was a metal ball with 4 antennae transmitting weak signals into space, the first human-made satellite. And many Americans were all scanning the skies and worrying, just as many of us in West LA, Beverly Hills, Pico-Robertson are like, where the heck is this shooter? During World War II, Japanese meteorologists tapped the jet stream to float 9,300 balloons with anti-personnel bombs and incendiary devices toward Alaska and the West Coast. They wanted to set the Northwest ablaze. About 300 of them landed, mostly in damp forest, did little damage. Now, the balloon freakout taps into our fear and our fascination with the prospect of aliens paying Earth a visit. So these unidentified anomalous phenomena, that's what the Pentagon are referring to these UFO devices, unidentified aerial phenomena. And the key word is unidentified, mysterious. We don't know what these three things were that were shut down, where they came from, what they were doing. So we tend to worry more about risks. The less we understand them, the less empowered we feel to protect ourselves. So if you're bothered by something, you can finally give it a name. Like I had really bad health when I was 21, 22. Once I was able to give a name to it, chronic fatigue syndrome, I immediately kind of relaxed inside. At least it had a name. So risk perception fuels our fears. And also people in the news business and people in social media realize that what worries us gets our attention. So by blaring alerts and hyping the worry, the news media and social media people can heighten awareness and further brighten the blip on our emotional risk radar. So we end up over-fearing some things that arouse psychological fear, and we also sometimes dangerously under-fear other things. We tend to, generally speaking, act, operate, live in the world without an accurate level of awareness of how dangerous the world around us is. So we also comfortably engage in many risks that worry us less because we take them on voluntarily, like smoking or texting and driving. So this is from a retired Harvard instructor, the author of How Risky Is It Really? Why Our Fears Don't Always Match the Facts.
Surfer Barack Obama. Results like that would seem to defy the laws of known physics and qualify instead as a miracle. Was the 2020 election a miracle? Honestly, we don't know. We don't expect to get an answer to it tonight. So let's move instead to more immediate questions, like all these weird things shooting through the sky.
Okay, there was nothing weird about Joe Biden's victory in 2020. There was a 2% swing against Donald Trump in the suburbs, and that accounted both for the Democrats' successful 2018 midterm elections, also for their 2020 presidential triumph.
Over the United States and Canada that nobody seems able to positively identify. Should we be worried about these things? And then what about our infrastructure? The steel and concrete parts of America that the Biden administration has shown strange contempt for, possibly because they were built by those dreaded white construction workers that Mayor Pete dislikes so much. Our critical infrastructure appears to be falling apart. Is that a problem? Or can we, in the bright new transhumanist future our leaders envision, feed ourselves with McKinsey consultants alone? And if we can, how do they taste? You may be wondering all of this, or maybe you're not wondering any of it because you have no clue what we're talking about because the media hasn't told you about it. A press corps that's willing to spend a full week ignoring a toxic mushroom cloud over Ohio will ignore pretty much anything. So in case you're not up to date, here's a partial recap of events. Last night, there was a massive and as yet unexplained fire at a plant nursery just south of Orlando. The fire burned more than 2 acres of plastic planters. Now, burning plastic releases a lot of bad chemicals, including dioxins, which you don't want, and that's why you don't do this in your fireplace. When a single plastic beaker melted in Stanford's science building last year, the school evacuated the area.
Okay, here's a thread from journalist Louis Keene. And yeah, I've been to all these places. I'm familiar with these streets and these synagogues. I'm familiar with Louis Keene, and his mother's a journalism instructor. Second day in a row that someone has been shot in Pico-Robertson on their way home from synagogue. Today's victim is at the scene telling officers what happened. Judging by the number of cops, a couple of dozen shootings are likely to be investigated as connected. Both were drive-by shootings of Jewish men 2 blocks apart. The FBI is not currently involved. First news truck has arrived. Today's shooting occurred here at the intersection of Pickford and Bedford. Surrounding blocks have been cordoned off. Now we got an officer from the LAPD saying the incidents are not related because they are a different car. Hyundai today versus Honda yesterday. Different suspect description, white male versus Asian male. Neither shooting is being investigated as a hate crime. Detective in person says it's too early to say whether the incidents are connected. Could not confirm that it was a Hyundai used today and not a Honda. Different officers at the scene either saying they can't confirm what make the car was or they can't share that. Police are not going anywhere. Everything we know. Two men were walking home from prayer services. Right, here's a map detailing just how close the two shootings were to each other, less than 24 hours apart. So I've walked these streets hundreds of times. Okay, no car identified in the first shooting, car in the second incident is a Hyundai. Police narrative on the Pico-Robertson shootings has changed multiple times over the course of the day. Anything regarding whether this incident was a hate crime or whether the incidents are connected or even the suspect description should be considered subject to change. Now the LAPD news release says detectives believe the Pico-Robertson shootings may have involved the same suspect. Now he's described as a male Asian with a mustache and a goatee driving a possible white compact vehicle. Confirmed now. Same car, same gun. Investigation is now in the hands of the LAPD Major Crimes Division. So definitely keep an eye on what's happening in my neighborhood.
But outside Orlando, there was no evacuation. Residents were told to stay in their homes. None of the environmentalists in the Biden administration, the people who claim ostentatiously to care about the environment, said anything about it. Nor did they have a lot to say about what happened in Tucson on Tuesday. A tractor trailer carrying nitric acid rolled over on I-10. Nitric acid is a carcinogen. Within 2 hours of the crash, authorities evacuated a small number of residents. They told everybody living within a mile to shelter in place. Then 2 hours after that, they lifted the shelter-in-place order. But then the next morning, authorities announced that they had, quote, reinstated the shelter-in-place order for a 1 mile perimeter around the incident. And then they told residents to, quote, turn off heaters and or air conditioning systems that bring in outside air. Ooh, outside air. No air for you. Well, why did they give this order? Because the first order, it turns out, was wrong. It wasn't safe for people to move back into their homes. So just as in East Palestine, Ohio, authorities, for whatever reason, exposed people to dangerous chemicals. If this is incompetence, there seems to be an awful lot of it lately. Then today, it nearly happened again. A freight train derailed about 30 miles west of downtown Detroit. It's a Norfolk Southern train. That's the same company that operated the train that derailed in East Palestine, Ohio. 30 cars went off the tracks. Fortunately, if the information that we are getting tonight is accurate, and we can't vouch that it is, the car containing liquid chlorine did not overturn, apparently.
So much of the information about these shootings in my neighborhood is here on Twitter. Right, second day in a row, someone's been shot on their way home. Right, Jonathan Greenblatt of the ADL is extending his thoughts and prayers. Jewish media is all over it. Apparently, same suspect. ADL Los Angeles has spoken out. Okay, ABC 7. LAPD needs help tracking down 2 suspects responsible for shootings of 2 Jewish men on their way home from synagogue in Pico-Robertson. So there are more Jewish properties targeted in this area, one of the most heavily Jewish in America. This video shows a suspect throwing cinder blocks into a Jewish-owned office next to a kosher supermarket Club Mart near Pico and Robertson. For years, I've been begging Jewish Angelenos to invest in a local paper that actually covers L.A. It's been hours since a Jewish man was shot in Pico-Robertson. So this is, one of the most visible Jewish neighborhoods, like one of the top 2 visibly Jewish neighborhoods, maybe the number 1 Jewishly visible neighborhood in California. So the suspects who committed these shootings still at large. Thank God Jonathan Greenblatt's heart is with the Jewish community in Pico-Robertson. And good to know people are closely monitoring these incidents.
So that is, however you slice it, an awful lot of drama on our roads and rails in a single week. Who's in charge of our roads and rails anyway? Well, that would be the Secretary of Transportation. That would be Pete Buttigieg. He's in charge. He was asked about it today. In response, he pointed out that train derailments are not a big deal. Settle down. They're very common. Train derailments happen on average nearly 3 times every day.
Look, rail safety is something that has evolved a lot over the years, but there's clearly more that needs to be done because while this horrible situation has gotten a particularly high amount of attention, there are roughly 1,000 cases a year of a train derailing.
Wait a second. You think East Palestine is a big deal? 1,000 trains derail every year in the United States, says Pete Buttigieg, who presumably has the stats on that. Did you know that? Are you okay with 1,000 trains a year derailing in your country? Don't a lot of these trains carry highly dangerous chemicals through highly populated areas? Yeah. So if you were Pete Buttigieg, put yourself in his tiny position for a moment. If you were him, wouldn't fixing that, this ongoing disaster, be your very first priority? Well, of course it would be, but you're not Pete Buttigieg. Pete Buttigieg doesn't care about trains derailing. He cares about equity. Trains derailing, that's fine. You're fine. You're so fine that the people who show up to test the air and the water after a train derailment are wearing hazmat suits because the air and water are perfectly safe as long as you're wearing a hazmat suit. See? There's a simple solution to this. Stop whining. Now, what does Norfolk Southern think of all this? We'd love to know, but we don't know because the company skipped the town hall last night in East Palestine, Ohio. Hundreds of locals had gathered to ask obvious and, for them, pressing questions like, why are thousands of fish and animals dying?
Okay, let's try to turn things in a more positive direction. Just listening to the New Yorker profiler Salman Rushdie. Salman Rushdie is still defiant, guys, and he will not be stopped. So it just suddenly struck me, like, why is this such a familiar genre? Won't be stopped. There's a whole genre of news, won't be stopped. You know, the plucky underdog who won't be stopped. All right, so 3 keys. I just put won't be stopped in quotes into Google News. 3 keys to Minnesota beating Penn State. Guys, Minnesota won't be stopped. Anti-union laws won't be stopped. Chinese boorishness will continue if they won't be stopped. Statement from the Philippines. Out of Florida, people who want to do harm to others won't be stopped by the gun permit requirement. Should the law stop Lydia Thorpe from jumping ship? Her departure from the Green Party in Australia, the Greens, won't be stopped. I work in a law firm and still wear micro mini skirts. It's a bad habit, but I won't be stopped. What a courageous young woman. I mean, she's willing to admit that it's a bad habit, but she won't be stopped. Right? Maybe we can learn from her. Right? Whoa. Even though I have a job in the legal field, I still wear my micro mini skirts. Victoria admits she still wears micro mini skirts to work at a law firm. She doesn't plan on stopping. These bloody ads from The Sun won't stop either. She posted a risque video to her TikTok admitting her bad habit, so she may sport a business look on top, but her bottoms are a bit more trendy. Can't be stopped. Powerful. We can all learn from Victoria. She won't be stopped. May we all benefit from her courage. 10 reasons why ESG, so equity and other good things, sustainable stuff, ESG. 10 reasons why ESG won't be stopped, guys. Biden's student debt relief plan won't be stopped by the GOP. Inspiring young entrepreneur won't be stopped. America's favorite show, Yellowstone, won't be stopped. Indiana Pacers guard Tyrese Halliburton won't be stopped by more defensive attention. Sergeant Michael Bloom won't be stopped. I know a Michael Bloom. Okay, but it's not that Michael Bloom. Anyway, it won't be stopped. American Jews won't be stopped from traveling to Ukraine for Rosh Hashanah. Black women have always moved this country forward on Election Day. We won't be stopped. The Dark Knight won't be stopped. Jalea Williams, a female basketball player, won't be stopped. Bomb cyclone. Santa Claus won't be stopped by a bomb cyclone. Stephen Cohen, owner of the New York Mets, he won't be stopped as Major League Baseball tries to slow his Mets ambition. Okay, Big Bash League. All right, cricket, T20 cricket in Australia. New COVID rules mean players won't be stopped from playing. Elden Ring speedrunners won't be stopped by a nerf. NATO expansion won't be stopped by Turkey. Kremlin won't be if the Kremlin are not stopped in Ukraine, guys. Here are next to Baltic states and then Poland. Security expert. Cancer care won't be stopped in the United Kingdom for nurse strikes. Greg Norman says that his new golf league won't be stopped. Cristiano Ronaldo says he won't be stopped from doing explosive interview. Some project in India won't be stopped. The green hydrogen revolution has started and it won't be stopped. Climate change won't be stopped by 593 pages of green tape. Bobcat won't be stopped by a pandemic. Users of Microsoft Office won't be stopped from connecting to Microsoft 365 if they have older software. The John Basilone Memorial Parade, right? He's an American war hero in World War II, won't be stopped. Insolent Britain won't be stopped by people who think you can grow concrete. Okay, Hamilton, right? Lewis Hamilton has vowed that Mercedes will not be stopped in our tracks. She's a Wonder won't be stopped. That's a horse. Sasha Banks from The Mandalorian won't be stopped. Charlie Worsham won't be stopped in new song Fist Through This Town. California flash mob robbers won't be stopped. Biden says Iran won't be stopped with no credible military option. Work won't be stopped on Mercedes-Benz cars. There's no silver bullet to solve the Channel migrant crisis, the channel between Europe and the United Kingdom. The Green Revolution, once again, has started. Guys, it won't be stopped. Why go to Ukraine for Rosh Hashanah? Don't understand the connection between the holy day and Ukraine. So why do so many Jews go to Ukraine for Rosh Hashanah? It has to do with tradition, history. And they won't be stopped, guys.
На жаль, ми вимушені вакуумом покрити цю інформацію, тому що ми розуміємо, що є повномасштабне вторгнення Росії до України, і ворог моніторить інформацію.
Okay. Hasidic Jewish pilgrims celebrate Rosh Hashanah in Ukraine. Won't be stopped. So Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty is funded by the American government. These Jews won't be stopped. Okay. Also looked up the defiance of. So New Yorker's got a long article, The Defiance of Salman Rushdie. So the defiance of, put it into quotes into Google News, Black Joy as Black Resistance, LeBron James, and the defiance of complacency. Competitive as F, top 5 iconic Black Olympians. Polish officials denounce European community taking Poland to the EU top court. EC, I don't know EC. The beauty and terror of skiing. That's the defiance of traversing a mountain. Israeli government legalizes 9 outposts. U.S. still in dark over mystery flying objects. The defiance of international law. So, a lot of defiance, right? People are not going to be stopped. They're just filled with defiance. And I'm here to cover the resistance. I'd like to think that we're all part of the resistance. And this community, may I dare say it, we won't be stopped. Right? The defiance of Salman Rushdie. Salman Rushdie, guys, he won't be stopped. Right, this is a New Yorker article.
Profiles. Published in the print issue of The New Yorker with the headline, Defiance. Despite a near-fatal stabbing and decades of death threats, Salman Rushdie won't stop telling stories. Written by David Remnick.
I don't know about you, but I'm a little tired of this journalistic genre. So-and-so won't be stopped. Right? She won't be stopped wearing micro miniskirts. Salman Rushdie won't be stopped telling stories. Did you realize that Salman Rushdie made some, major apology for the things he wrote in Satanic Verses and absolutely groveled before the Ayatollahs? But didn't really work. Anyway, the defiance of Salman Rushdie, he won't stop telling stories, guys.
Narrated by Vikas Adam. When Salman Rushdie turned 75 last summer, he had every reason to believe that he had outlasted the threat of assassination. A long time ago, on Valentine's Day, 1989, Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, declared Rushdie's novel, The Satanic Verses, blasphemous and issued a fatwa ordering the execution of its author and all those involved in its publication. Rushdie, a resident of London, spent the next decade in a fugitive existence, under constant police protection. But after settling in New York in 2000, he lived freely, insistently unguarded. He refused to be terrorized.
So I was just thinking, just imagine them doing a story like that about Tucker Carlson. Tucker Carlson won't back down, right? He won't be stopped. He refuses to be terrorized. Or imagine them doing a story like that about Rush Limbaugh or, I don't know, Jared Taylor or Peter Brimlow or Heather McDonald or Amy Wax. Amy Wax won't back down. She won't be stopped. She refuses to be terrorized. But it's always plucky people on the left who won't back down, won't stop telling their stories, singing their songs, wearing their micro miniskirts.
There were times, though, when the lingering threat made itself apparent, and not merely on the lunatic reaches of the internet. In 2012, during the annual autumn gathering of world leaders at the United Nations, I joined a small meeting of reporters with Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, the president of Iran, and I asked him if...
Just imagine if the Southern Poverty Law Center or, what these other, anti-racist organizations, Hope Not Hate issues fatwa against Jared Taylor. I mean, that would be terrible. God forbid. They never do such thing. The good people at Hope Not Hate and the Southern Poverty Law Center, they never do such a thing. Yeah, and you're probably thinking, oh, that would be funny as F, man. The Southern Poverty Law Center and Hope Not Hate started, pronouncing fatwas against racists or, people who had more ethnic pride than is socially acceptable, people who had stronger in-group identities than is socially acceptable. And you're thinking, oh, that would be funny, man. That would not be funny. That would be illegal. That would be morally heinous. And the good people in these anti-hate, anti-racism organizations would never do such a thing. So don't even compare them to the Ayatollahs of Iran.
Multi-million-dollar bounty that an Iranian foundation had placed on Rushdie's head had been rescinded. Ahmadinejad smiled with a glint of malice. Salman Rushdie, where is he now? He said. There is no news of him. Is he in the United States? If he is in the U.S., you shouldn't broadcast that for his own safety.
Wow, that'd be absolutely unfathomable if Hope Not Hate or the Southern Poverty Law Center or some other, left-wing anti-racism, anti-hate, some Antifa organization started speaking that way. That would never happen, right? Because people with strong in-group identities won't be stopped. We continue to live in defiance. Hope Not Hate won't be stopped. The defiance of the in-group identity.
Within a year, Ahmadinejad was out of office and out of favor with the mullahs. Rushdie went on living as a free man. The years passed. He wrote book after book, taught, lectured, traveled, met with readers, married, divorced, and became a fixture in the city that was his adopted home. If he ever felt the need for some vestige of anonymity, he wore a baseball cap. Recalling his first few months in
Yeah, just imagine them doing a story like this about Tucker Carlson or, Jared Taylor. If he ever needed anonymity, he walked around, with a baseball cap because he would not be stopped.
New York, Rushdie told me, people were scared to be around me. I thought the only way I can stop that is to behave as if I'm not scared. I have to show them there's nothing to be scared about. One night, he went out to dinner with Andrew Wiley, his agent and friend, at Nick.
So operating as though there's nothing to be scared of, sometimes a good strategy, sometimes a bad strategy. Right? Best to live in reality and have an appropriate level of fear. Right. Lewis Hamilton says nothing will stop him from speaking out after new rules have been imposed about clamping down on political statements. So thank God, Lewis Hamilton, the great racing car driver for Mercedes, he will not be stopped.
Tony's, an extravagantly conspicuous restaurant in East Hampton. The painter, Eric Fischel, stopped by their table and said, "Shouldn't we all be afraid and leave the restaurant?" "Well, I'm having dinner," Rushdie replied. "You can do what you like." Fischel hadn't meant to offend, but sometimes there was a tone of derision in press accounts of Rushdie's indefatigable presence on the New York nightlife scene, as Laura M. Holson put it in the Times. Some people thought he should have adopted a more austere posture toward his predicament. Would Solzhenitsyn have gone on stage with Bono or danced the night away at Mumbai?
Chat says, 40's hair makes him look like an Ellen DeGeneres type lesbian. Thank you. Mandatory haircut every 30 days, bro. Well, I'm under attack here, man. Like Orthodox Jewish man getting shot in my neighborhood. I didn't have time to put water on the old hair, slick it back. Right? I'm under attack, bro.
For Rushdie, keeping a low profile would be capitulation. He was a social being and would live as he pleased. He even tried to render the fatwa ridiculous. 6 years ago, he played himself in an episode of Curb Your Enthusiasm in which Larry David provokes threats from Iran for mocking the Ayatollah while promoting his upcoming production, Fatwa the Musical. David is terrified, but Rushdie's character assures him that life under an edict of execution, though it can be scary, also makes a man alluring to women. It's not exactly you, it's the fatwa wrapped around you, like sexy pixie dust, he says. With every public gesture, it appeared, Rushdie was determined to show that he would not merely survive, but flourish, at his desk and on the town. There was no such thing as absolute security, he wrote in his third-person memoir, Joseph Anton, published in 2012. There were only varying degrees of insecurity. He would have to learn to live with that. He well understood that his demise would not require the coordinated efforts of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps or Hezbollah. A cracked loner could easily do the job. But I had come to feel that it was a very long time ago and that the world moves on, he told me. In September 2021, Rushdie married the poet and novelist Rachel Eliza Griffiths, whom he'd met 6 years earlier.
Okay, so Salman Rushdie, right, doesn't share our politics. He's not exactly a big fan of Western civilization. He's definitely a man of the left, big anti-racism crusader. But I think we have to stand with Salman, right? You can't allow outside groups to shut down freedom of speech. It's like when I played soccer, right? Sometimes I made an errant tackle, but no one's ever gotten up and choked me. But friends of mine playing soccer with, let's say, out groups, right, making an elementary tackle, and suddenly, this immigrant will get up and just choke you out. So civilization has to maintain standards, and one of the standards of Western civilization is that we don't murder people for what they say. So however loathsome I find Salman Rushdie's politics, all right, I support freedom of speech, and I do not support importing people who, stab people and shoot people and try to kill people for things that they say.
Why? But executives at Norfolk Southern didn't show up at the event. Why? Because they were worried for their own safety.
Because they're scared for their safety.
Hundreds of anxious residents packed a school gym here in East Palestine on Wednesday night, looking for answers almost 2 weeks after a huge train derailment released hazardous chemicals into their town, contaminating much of the surrounding area. But there were notable absences from the town hall meeting, including the rail operator, Norfolk Southern. Also not attending, Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg. The mayor says he's had limited contact with the White House, leaving folks here frustrated, angry, and complaining about a lack of information from the feds and Norfolk Southern. State officials and the EPA say the water and air are both safe, but residents here tell a different story. They say they've been getting sick, and so have their pets.
It's so safe, we're not going there. Our oxygen tanks are empty, and by the way, they're...
Okay, sounds like a good time to reflect on the temptations of Carl Schmitt.
Even as he began delivering lectures in Munich, the first general elections of the Reich saw the Weimar coalition immediately lose their majority, illuminating the shaky foundations of the Republic. The challenge facing Germany, as Schmitt increasingly saw it, stemmed directly from the weakness engendered by the hesitancy of liberal proceduralism and parliamentary government. At the end of the summer of 1920, Schmitt had, not coincidentally, finished one of his first major works, Dictatorship, which would be published in early 1921. In it, he explores the history of dictatorship, from its original Roman usage to the wartime state of siege used in Germany during the war. In doing so, he lays out an important distinction between two forms of dictatorship: a commissary dictatorship, in which a dictator is chosen and granted special powers in order to defend the existing constitutional structure of the state, and a sovereign dictatorship, in which a dictator uses his powers to wholly replace the constitution. Either way, to Schmitt, a dictatorship can be democratically legitimate if it fulfills the state's obligation to protect, even if it acts beyond the law in making necessary decisions, given that, as he would later explain elsewhere, the endeavor of a normal state consists above all in assuring total peace within the state and its territory. To create tranquility, security, and order, and thereby establish the normal situation, is the prerequisite for legal norms to be valid. Every norm presupposes a normal situation, and no norm can be valid in an entirely abnormal situation. In theory, the dictator reestablishes the normal situation, and therefore legal norms. What Schmitt was most interested in at this time, however, was the broader concept of sovereignty. Who is truly sovereign? Who is the one who actually has the power to decide to act? The answer he settled on, first in Dictatorship, and then more directly in Political Theology, published in 1922, would become one of his most famous lines. Sovereign is he who decides the exception.
Okay, we're in an exceptional state in my neighborhood right now with a gunman on the loose, 2 Orthodox Jewish men shot in the past 2 days. But who decides the state of exception? All right, coronavirus came along, and suddenly we were in a state of exception where many rights that we took for granted were just taken away. But then when people wanted to go out and protest against police violence and anti-racism, then, right, all those rights were restored. So you got your rights back if you were participating in like left-wing terrorist protest. So overturning the rule of law. What was amazing about the Black Lives Matter Antifa reign of terror that launched in May of 2020, what was amazing is that our elite signed on with this reign of terror, this reign of astronomical crime rates, murder rates, buildings being looted, burned, businesses being destroyed. And Fortune 500 companies were funding this. They were funding Black Lives Matter. They were funding terrorism. They were supporting the destruction of our society and this massive rates of crime. So what the heck is going on in your society when your elites are all on board with seemingly the trashing of large parts of your society?
There are elderly, low-income people on crutches there. We don't feel safe around them. But from the perspective of the people who live in East Palestine, it looks a little different. You would think if you live in the United States and you send by force at gunpoint half of your annual pay to Washington, someone in Washington would care when your town is poisoned by a train derailment. Oh, but you thought wrong. Who do you think you are, Ukrainian? Nobody cares about you. Is this Kyiv? No, it's Ohio. Shut up. The Biden administration has other priorities, by the way, like shooting down $300 weather balloons with $400,000 missiles. And yes, apparently they did that. Joe Biden himself admitted it today.
We don't yet know exactly what these 3 objects were, but nothing right now suggests they were related to China's spy balloon program or that they were surveillance vehicles from any other country. The intelligence community's current assessment is that these 3 objects were most likely balloons tied to private companies, recreation or research institutions studying weather or conducting other scientific research.
That's the quote. Intelligence community, air quotes now required. That's the intelligence community's assessment. Oh, their kids sent a balloon up and we sent a Sidewinder after it. Mission accomplished.
Okay, so what happens when you're living in a state of exception? How to understand it?
In Schmitt's view, it isn't humanly possible to write law that can completely predict and account for in advance every possible situation. A legal framework must necessarily provide for the means to handle exceptional circumstances, that is, situations beyond what is written in law. In such circumstances, a state of exception exists, whether formally declared or not, in which the law as written can no longer apply. Much as Schmitt experienced while in Munich, states of exception and dictatorships often go hand in hand. The dictator emerges to resolve the state of exception by personifying the law when the law cannot mechanistically provide pre-made decisions. This is the case whether the dictator is put forward by the constitutional state or by the raw will of the people. But the dictator isn't necessarily sovereign. The one with ultimate sovereignty is not he who handles exceptions, but he who decides what counts as an exception. With these concepts, Schmitt had nearly finished building the foundations that would inform his lifelong political theory of the state and the political future of Germany. He was, however, still only a relatively obscure young academic with an intellectual theory for justifying a strong state, but no political influence of his own. This would begin to change as Schmitt moved to take up increasingly prestigious positions over the following years, first in Bonn and then in Berlin. He would there increasingly begin to travel among the intellectuals of Germany's conservative revolution, a loosely affiliated movement of reactionary and conservative nationalists, such as the historian Oswald Spengler and the war hero and arch-conservative writer Ernst Jünger. It was Jünger in particular who, in addition to becoming a close personal friend, would first help propel Schmitt into circles of real political influence. By the start of 1930, Schmitt began to be asked by state ministers to write legal opinions on the justifiable scope of emergency decrees. The economic situation in Germany was collapsing, and the Republic was growing desperate for any means to remain standing. By mid-1932, the Weimar Reich had reached a point of acute crisis, with blood again regularly being spilled in the streets as the Communists, National Socialists, and Reichsauer battled each other ceaselessly. In June, Reich President Hindenburg appointed Franz von Papen as Chancellor, and then, in July, made him Reich Commissar of Prussia as well, with a military state of exception declared in Berlin and Brandenburg. The Social Democrats challenged the legality of...
Right, so for most people, their primary concern is survival, right? Their primary concern is not the enjoying of their constitutional rights. What people most want to do is survive, and they're usually willing to give up quite a few rights to survive.
Of this unprecedented appointment. And suddenly Schmitt found himself given the task of defending it in court as the crown jurist for the Reich. Schmitt argued that the Reich had a duty to act against parties that represented enemies of the state in order to prevent the outbreak of civil war, and emphasized that Article 48 of the Weimar Constitution provided extremely broad powers for the Reich president to, if necessary, dissolve parliament and rule by presidential decree alone, i.e. through commissary dictatorship. Simultaneously, he would make the argument, formalized in his pamphlet Legality and Legitimacy, 1932, that preserving an equal chance for gaining political power, in fact required that those opposition parties judged to be enemies of the Constitution be legally excluded from political participation. On this, the Federal Republic of Germany to this day maintains that Schmitt was right. With this, Schmitt succeeded in a provisional legal defense of dictatorship, though the case would continue into the autumn of 1932 and end ambiguously. Papen began considering a plan, based on Schmitt's arguments, for the declaration of a state of emergency and general national rule by presidential decree.
So Carl Schmitt wanted to make the two totalitarian extreme parties of both the right and the left, the Nazis and the communists, wanted to make them illegal. In essence, no liberty for the enemies of liberty.
At the same time, Schmitt was tasked with beginning to himself draft a new constitution for Germany. Neither of those plans would unfold as intended, however. The much more radical National Socialist Nazi Party gained ground in summer elections, and the stupid Papen hesitated too long, according to Schmitt. The emergency plan was put on hold, and their new constitution never got off the ground. When Papen was then deposed as chancellor by Kurt von Schleicher in December 1932, Schmitt found himself back outside of power, disgruntled, and giving up hope for the Reich's survival. He began to speak of the need to somehow build not just a strong state, but a total state capable of protecting itself against all enemies, internal and external. When 2 months later, Schleicher's position as chancellor was handed over to Adolf Hitler, through presidential decree, Schmitt would find his chance to follow this path to its end. But back in our present era, it may be worth considering, did a state of exception arrive in America in 2020? More than one politician and public intellectual did call for the exceptional deployment of military force to restore order amid a summer of uncontained violence, but none of these calls were heeded.
Right, that was Senator Tom Cotton. So we definitely went into a state of exception, first with COVID, and then an exception for the rules restricting the spread of COVID. Right, if you're an anti-racist activist, then you got absolved from having to follow the rules that the rest of us had to.
Despite years of loud claims that he deeply desired any possible opportunity to declare a dictatorship, then President Donald Trump either decided against announcing any state of exception in response to the riots, or found himself unable to actually make that sovereign decision. A clear state of exception nonetheless did soon arrive, however, if in response to a threat of an entirely different kind, the COVID-19 pandemic. In the name of protecting public safety, citizens' normal civil liberties, up to and including bodily autonomy and freedom of association, were suspended for an indefinite duration. Normal democratic procedures were superseded. Opposition to these emergency powers was monitored and policed by the national security state. But who decided on this exception? The president? The technocratic national or international public health bureaucracy? a handful of specialized experts, and their billionaire backers from around the world? For most people, the answer remains rather hazy. A second, more straightforward justification for maintaining a state of exception soon followed. In the wake of the riot at the Capitol building on January 6, 2021, new executive units were deployed with wide latitude to define and police domestic extremists. State-directed censorship of communications became the prevailing norm. Investigative committees with extraordinary powers were established, and the right of sitting opposition political figures to participate in electoral contests even began to be challenged. A bit over a year and a half later, the President of the United States had, while drenched in blood-red lighting and symbolically flanked by uniformed military personnel, hammered his fists on a podium and delivered a speech claiming that the state was under assault by his political opposition, whom he declared represented an extremism that threatens the very foundations of our republic. His government, he averred, was engaged in a battle for the soul of this nation with this faction, who didn't recognize the will of the people, and who posed a clear and present danger to our democracy. It would, he intoned, be to do ourselves no favor to pretend otherwise. One political party had, in the eyes of the ruling regime, apparently been confirmed as no mere parliamentary debating partner, but as a mortal threat to the continued existence of the state. For Schmitt,
right, so disputes are going to just remain a matter of debate and discussion and argument, all right? When disputes reach a level of intensity that groups' very existence is at stake, then you're in a state of exception. The ordinary rules no longer apply.
Such a sharp existential distinction by the regime between its friends and its enemies would be not only predictable but inevitable, and in fact essential to its interests. Friends and enemies. Schmitt published his most well-known and influential work.
Right, so it's one of the most basic questions when you encounter a stranger, when you're in an unfamiliar situation, right? When the world turns turbulent, right? Are you surrounded by friends or are you surrounded by enemies?
The concept of the political in 1927, revising it for republication in 1932. From its opening line, the concept of the state presupposes the concept of the political. Schmitt seeks to define what the political, and therefore the business of the political state, actually is. His answer is straightforward. The political is no less and no more than distinguishing between one's friends and one's enemies. For Schmitt, the essence of politics is not parliamentary debate or building consensus or setting tax policy, or even determining who gets to be in charge of running things.
Right, so your enemy is he who threatens your very existence.
Instead, the political is the most intense and extreme antagonism. It is the ever-present possibility of combat that comes into existence whenever one collectivity of people confronts a similar collectivity. Such a divide between groups may begin over religious, moral, cultural, economic, or even completely trivial differences, and continue to always be dressed up in those terms. But all such non-political differences are pushed aside at the precise moment that they become strong enough to group human beings effectively according to friend and enemy, and are thereby subsumed into the political. This moment necessarily arrives if either side finds that it must judge whether the adversary intends to negate his opponent's way of life, and therefore must be repulsed or fought in order to preserve one's own form of existence.
And chat says freedom of association ended with civil rights laws in 1964. I don't think it ended. It certainly was restricted. You increase rights in one area, but you have to do it at the price of reducing rights in another area.
Then the enemy represents the other, the stranger, and it is sufficient for his nature that he is, in an especially intense way, existentially something different and alien, so that in the extreme case, conflicts with him are possible.
Right, so the more tense your situation, right, the more you feel that you're under attack, under threat, that your very survival is at stake, right, the more suspicious you're going to feel towards strangers, right? Being at ease with strangers, requires a genuine feeling of well-being on your own part. But when the pressure increases, when the stress builds, when your own existence is at stake, most people turn against strangers, and Jews, pretty much everywhere they go in the world, they are a stranger.
Friend and enemy must therefore be understood in their concrete and existential sense, not as metaphors or symbols. for they receive their real meaning precisely because they refer to the real possibility of physical killing. War follows from enmity. War is the existential negation of the enemy if this extremity is not a real possibility. Then a distinction between friend and enemy does not yet exist, and so neither does the political. For Schmitt, the concept of the state presupposes the concept of the political because the state as an organized political entity decides for itself the friend-enemy distinction. If some other entity is the one that decides this distinction, the state is no longer the decisive political entity, for if it is no longer the one that decides, then it is no longer sovereign. And given that the obligation of the state is to protect its group from all threats, external and internal, and because this group, by Schmitt's very definition of the political, must be a homogeneously unified collective, then, as long as the state is a political entity, this requirement for internal peace compels it in critical situations to decide upon the domestic enemy, which is why every state provides, therefore, some kind of formula for the declaration of an internal enemy. And no amount of moralistic hesitancy or liberal obfuscations about a politically neutral state can long delay the need to make this decision, Schmitt says, because everywhere in political history, in foreign as well as domestic politics, the incapacity or the unwillingness to make this distinction is a symptom of the political end.
Right. So when your life isn't at stake, right, when your group isn't, fighting for its survival, when you're not under threat, then you can afford to make all sorts of other distinctions aside from the friend-enemy distinction. You can distinguish between the morally righteous, the morally wicked. You can distinguish between the aesthetic and the unaesthetic. You can have all sorts of ways of dividing people up. But when your existence is at stake, all right, the primary distinction becomes the friend-enemy distinction.
For if a people no longer possess the energy or the will to maintain itself in the sphere of politics, the latter will not thereby vanish from the world. Only a weak people will disappear.
Right, so does Israel have a right to exist? Do Jews have a right to exist? Do any group have a right to exist? Does any nation state have a right to exist? No, unless you want to take a leap of faith, all right? Your existence depends upon your willingness to defend what you have. Right? If you're not willing to defend what you have, to take up arms if necessary, to do whatever is necessary to survive, then you're not going to be around very long in this world.
For the state and the statesman, the sole remaining question then is always whether such a friend and enemy grouping is really at hand, regardless of which human motives have brought it about. And political thought and political instinct prove themselves theoretically and practically in the ability to distinguish friend and enemy.
And something in the chat, I don't think they have an Eruv in Australia. Yes, they have Eruvim in Australia, which makes it easier to carry on the Sabbath and to sustain a Jewish community. So there are Eruvim in Sydney, in Melbourne, maybe other places in Australia and New Zealand. So quite the thriving little Jewish communities in Melbourne and Sydney, with mikvahs and something like 6 Jewish day schools in Sydney alone.
Thus, the highest political reality is those moments in which the enemy is in concrete clarity, recognized as the enemy. If portions of the American right have today turned to Schmitt as a guide, it may be because they now have plenty of reason to believe the purported procedural neutrality of the liberal technocratic state is nothing but the thinnest of veils covering an existential antagonism that in truth the crucial political distinction has now already been made for them. They have been identified in concrete clarity as the enemies of the state.
Now, I think most intellectuals who have taken up Carl Schmitt over the past 40 years are on the left rather than the right.
It happens that Schmitt...
So what unites devotees of Carl Schmitt is generally a skepticism about liberalism and the technocratic state.
In fact, voiced particular unease about how he expected liberalism would tend to define its enemies. By insisting on having transcended the political through its commitment to pluralism and enlightened universal values, and therefore incapable of ever acknowledging the possibility of sinking to the level of identifying a human enemy, liberalism would, he predicted, confiscate the word humanity, thus denying the enemy the quality of being human. In such a case, for the liberal, any resulting war is then considered to constitute the absolute last war of humanity. And ultimately, such a war is necessarily unusually intense and inhuman because, by transcending the limits of the political framework, it simultaneously degrades the enemy into moral and other categories, and is forced to make him a monster that must not only be defeated, but also utterly annihilated.
Okay, so we got Channel 7 in Los Angeles on the story of these shootings here in Pico-Robertson.
In the Jewish community in the Pico-Robertson area after 2 shootings in 2 days, both victims targeted while leaving nearby synagogues.
Now, News reporter Josh Haskell is live in Pico-Robertson, where we're now getting new details from police on a possible connection between these 2 shootings. Josh?
And David, shootings in this neighborhood are very rare. Anti-Semitism, unfortunately, is not. Now, the LAPD right now is saying that these shootings, they're not sure whether these are hate crimes, but those who live here can't see them being anything else. Los Angeles' Jewish community is on edge after 2 men were shot in separate incidents after they left morning prayers at 2 Pico-Robertson synagogues. Detectives believe the shootings may have involved the same suspect, but have no indication of a hate crime at this time.
On the Sabbath, on Shabbat, we don't drive, we walk to synagogue, and this is why I live in this neighborhood, because all the synagogues are so close, and this is what attracts us to come here. So I really hope that they find them.
Everybody should be able to go to and from a place of worship, whether that be a house or whether that be an actual synagogue or a mosque or a church. People have the right to pray and pray safely.
The first incident happened Wednesday morning near the intersection of Shenandoah and Cascio Streets. A Jewish man in his 40s wearing a yarmulke was walking to his car when someone shot him and then drove away. The other incident happening only 1 block away at the intersection of Pickford and South Bedford. A Jewish man in his 70s was shot at from a suspect inside a vehicle. Both victims are expected to survive.
It's definitely scary, just raises more awareness, and it hits home a lot, especially when you know them and you know the community, so hits home.
Those who live in the neighborhood where the shooting took place are convinced these shootings were motivated by hatred of the Jewish people.
There's no way that this is a coincidence, and in a very Jewish neighborhood, both men leaving synagogues, possibly with a kippah on their head. I mean, you do the math, I think it's pretty clear. Yeah.
They didn't stop them to get their wallet. There was no struggle. The guy just came out of the bushes, shot my friend, and ran away. What other reasoning could you have?
And Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass calling these attacks on members of our Jewish community unacceptable. Again, detectives now.
So this neighborhood, just south of this neighborhood, you had some innovative police tactics dealing with gangs such as the Playboy Gangster Crip gang. So this gang operates just about 4 blocks south of where these shootings occurred.
All that and much more tax to the gang's history. Yeah. All right. Welcome to Cali's Most Dangerous. Let's get into it.
My friend, she was killed. She was 14. She got her head blew off. They don't care about no girl. A girl life is meaningless, just like a man's life.
On February 28th, 1985, Erica Johnson, Glenn Martell, and Jadarick Bond were chilling in a parked car in West Los Angeles, California at around 9 p.m. At first, everything was good. Martell and Glenn, they invited Erica into the car to smoke and chill. But everything quickly went left when Martell reaches into his pants pockets, grabs his pistol, and fires 4 shots to Erica's face before the 2 men exit the car and run away from the murder scene. It was alleged that Martell and Bond set up Erica because she had been subpoenaed earlier that day as a witness in an assault case against an alleged leader of the Playboy Gangster Crips. The 2 men were caught and arrested that night, and the trial began in the summer of 1986. The testimony during a 6-week trial showed that the pair were already members of a lesser-known gang. They killed Erica in an effort to gain acceptance into the tougher Playboy Gangster Crips. Here's the thing, they wasn't telling the cops nothing. There wasn't no snitching with the Playboy Gangster Crips, but the pigs already had what they needed. Key evidence in the trial was a police tape recording made secretly of Martell and Bond discussing the killing while seated in the police car after the arrest. During the trial, it was said that the men showed no remorse for the killings, often smiled and even were laughing a few times. One of the witnesses said, "I've been to this trial a few times, and I've noticed the defendants as they come in and they take it as if it's a joke. To me, it's very hard to accept. I can't understand the look on their faces. I can't understand how someone would take another man's life." Also, the DA who prosecuted the two men said later, although he serves in the office's hardcore gang unit, he had never seen a case where they were so casual about killing somebody.
Okay, so just south of Beverly Hills, about a mile south, about 4 blocks south of these shootings, right, you have La Cienega Heights, right? It used to be known as Corning-Cadillac when it was dominated by the Playboy Gangster Crips. That video is about them. So Louis Keene, the Jewish journalist, I read his long Twitter thread on these two shootings of male Orthodox Jews in the last 2 days. Pico-Robertson, he wrote a couple of years ago, "When I signed a lease on an apartment on Corning in 2018, I couldn't believe my luck. The location couldn't be beaten. 15 minutes from the beach, 20 minutes from downtown, a stone's throw from Beverly Hills, yet I could afford it on a writer's salary. Moreover, at a moment when I felt ambivalent about Orthodox Judaism, I could observe as I pleased. Most of the block's residents were of Mexican descent, as was my new roommate, a stranger who had posted on Craigslist. But the neighborhood was adjacent to the heavily Orthodox Pico-Robertson area where I grew up, and I could walk to my parents for Shabbat dinner. What I did not then understand was that the neighborhood, the very block, had changed a lot over the past 60 years. My good fortune had come at the tail end of a decades-long process of race-based discrimination. The Jewish revival of La Cienega Heights, as the neighborhood has been known since 2003. It's not quite happened at the expense of black life, but the trajectory of these 18 square blocks underscores the subtle ways in which American Jews often benefit from structural anti-black racism. So La Cienega Heights was overwhelmingly like 95%, 99% white and Jewish through the 1950s. Then in 1967 came the first seeds of integration. So that was the year the original cohort of black students from South Los Angeles was bused to Alexander Hamilton High School, a mile from Corning Street. By 1972, half of the school students were black. By 1980, 60% of La Cienega Heights residents were black. Many of the area's white residents, including almost all its Jewish population, moved out. So, wow, we've got helicopters overhead right now. La Cienega Heights was not spared the introduction of rock cocaine into black communities or the emergence of street gangs through the 1980s. Wrought iron window bars and barbed wire went up around the neighborhood as a homegrown gang. The Playboy Gangster Crips sold crack on Corning Street, controlled the surrounding blocks. So this is about 3 blocks south of these shootings. The 1987 gang injunction developed to stop that gang, the first of its kind in the country. It was the first of a series crackdowns on crime in the neighborhood. What followed over the next 30 years was a gradual outflow of the neighborhood's black residents and an influx of Latino immigrants who took their place. So La Cienega Heights, the area bound by Robertson and La Cienega Boulevards between Sawyer and Cadillac, right, a place with no heights to speak of, is now roughly 20% black, 50% Latino. La Cienega Heights has sprouted a Kollel, institution that supports full-time Torah scholars. And in a 2015 book, Police, Power, and the Production of Racial Boundaries, you get a historical ethnography of La Cienega Heights. So the neighborhood was 80% Jewish in the 1950s, and then within 15 years, it became about 80% black. So as these Jews found professional success, they sent their children to Hamilton High School, which was once one of the top public high schools in the city. Then you got racial integration and the destruction of Hamilton High School.
It's one thing not to care. It's another to laugh about it, he said. They literally laughed in the face of the probation officer. They laughed during the course of the trial, and Martell was laughing in the court, said the officer. In the end, though, both Martell and Bond were sentenced to a maximum of 25 years to life in prison. Look, y'all gotta make sure y'all pay attention to these details of the story, man. Keep all this stuff in mind because it plays a big part in the current state of the Playboy Gangster Crips. This brings us to the danger rating of the Playboy Gangster Crips. The Playboy Gangster Crips receive a danger rating of an 8.8 out of 10 based off of the gang's long history of violence, extortion, and willingness to engage with anyone who wants to with them. What Big Sad say? Look, my mama understand I chose this life, I'm a gangbang. Any disrespect, I'm leaving niggas on front page. Bars, nigga. Look, I'm gonna be referencing a lot of Big Sad bars today.
Okay, gotta disavow that language. Right. So there's a whole book written on this neighborhood by a left-wing professor. 2015, it came out. Police Power and the Production of Racial Boundaries in La Cienega Heights. So the description on Amazon says this book explores the history of the area to explain how Cadillac Corning became viewed by outsiders as a violent neighborhood and how the city's first gang injunction, a restraining order aimed at alleged gang members, solidified this negative image. So this neighborhood became a test site for repressive practices that spread to the rest of the city. So the author thanks the Soros Justice Fellowships for their continued belief, concern, and support of her work. During the first part of her research from the summer of 2007 to the summer of 2010, she lived in the 18 square block Cadillac Corning neighborhood. And let's say hello to our friend Dooovid. Dooovid, how's it going, man?
Baruch Hashem.
So we've had some shootings of Orthodox Jewish men returning home from synagogue here in Pico-Robertson. So 2 shootings in the past 2 days.
Yeah, God forbid. I was reading about that. I checked your channel and you're talking about it. But I guess you started earlier tonight.
Yeah, so we got helicopters circling overhead. And big police presence, traffic life disrupted. We got, of course, the Sabbath starting in about 22 hours. What's going on with you, man? It's been a while since I've spoken to you.
Yeah, thank God. Just normal. I'm still doing the weekly tour of my library. So thank God I got 20 episodes. So next week should finish up all of my library, which more been like sections and a whole series of books. Okay, so props to Judas for the donation. Random, like I don't think we spoke for like the last month you were in Australia, so I thought it was of random note that it was before you met up with the name is slipping me now, the man from Australia who popped on my stream when you were on my channel.
Jim Bowden.
Yeah, Jim Bowden. So we had an interesting conversation, and then I saw that he got set up with a debate with Adam Green on the channel of Crucible, which I mentioned to you numerous times if you ever checked it in. And then the Crucible kicked him mid-debate. He was like, "Jim, you're boring. You're bounced." I'm not sure if you saw or covered that. But
No,
that was
I didn't
like
know
a month
that.
ago already.
So have you been participating in any more like controversial group streams aside from that one?
No, not really at all. I made a comment on this guy Sula Adar Weintraub, who I actually think is in Los Angeles. I messaged you and him about each other and mentioned if it was interesting for you to connect. So I spoke to him about counter-Semitism because he made a video about Adam Green, and Adam Green's like really the only one I keep in regular contact with. I messaged him and speak to him occasionally, and I told him to use the term counter-Semite because he wanted to speak to anti-Semites, and so I said, if you just call them anti-Semites, they're less likely to speak to you. And so he invited me on his channel, and we spoke about counter-Semitism as opposed to anti-Semitism. And I guess he's kind of a leftist Israeli-American IDF veteran that has dialogue with mostly Palestinians that is moving into trying to speak to anti-Semites. So that was really my only appearance. Ralph from House of Comments had he's been out for like a year and had one show that I popped on to. But besides for that, just Week in Review and my other streaming, which is relatively drama-free, mostly intellectual, probably similar for your content. Just took a less controversial, less impactful, smaller audience turn.
So you did a video with Sula speaking with a Jew who agrees with anti-Semites. I don't think that's an accurate description of you. I mean, you're you're willing to extend your empathy, but is that an accurate description of you?
No, he said he wanted more controversial terminology, and it might be his or his audience take on it, because I made a comment that to call anti-Semitism counter-Semitism. So, whatever, like he wanted to use that title. I was like, as he call whatever you want. But it's probably indicative of how Jews feel about me, God forbid, and probably why I stopped doing it. It's kind of like a lose-lose battle, especially like you see like the shooting in today, where God forbid, I never got any thanks for doing it, even though relatively from my own perspective, I was you're trying to stand up for the Jewish people. And my point was more what was kind of your original point to me, was that there's a lot of legitimate claims of problems of group conflict with Jews. And that's why I made the distinction of counter-Semitism, and that there is legitimate conflicts of interest between various groups. Specifically, this guy was probably interested in speaking to white European alt-righter types, and to just legitimize, not to say puts you in the camp of anti-Semitism, to say, well, of course Jews support immigration and multiculturalism, and of course that may not be in the best interest of the majority of whites in America, and it's a legitimate group conflict of interest. And so just making that concession already, God forbid, God forbid, Doovid's an anti-Semite. So, unfortunately, my perspective is not popular among Jews. Even legitimizing to say that like E. Michael Jones or Kevin McDonald, that I'll legitimize that anti-Semitism is a reaction to Jewish behavior, and largely the cause of anti-Semitism is bad Jewish behavior, which are points that I'm willing to concede, and God forbid, seem to be extremely unpopular among Jews, as you could see of even just the way this man titled our program.
Yeah, I mean, how I would phrase it is that how Jews behave will have some effect, right? How any group behaves will have some effect on how outsiders perceive it. But I wouldn't say that it's not necessarily the majority shaper of how they're perceived. So, for example, Christianity and Islam both got their start, from inside of Judaism or affected by Judaism, and so they have a strong incentive to legitimate their own groups to, put down Judaism. So there are a lot of factors, but definitely how an individual behaves, how a group behaves, is going to have a significant effect on how people perceive it. And then Jews are, disproportionately active in, many parts of life, such as politics, culture, and sometimes different groups have different interests, and so they're clashing group interests, not just between Jews and non-Jews, but often between blacks and whites, gays and straights, Latinos and Asians, right? Human being tends to have infinite desires, but we live in a finite world, and so different groups often have different interests, different strengths, different weaknesses, and when we live in proximity to each other, there are often, clashing interests, and these clashing interests are not necessarily overwhelmingly just out of ignorance. Sometimes the more we get to know some other group, the more disturbing we find it. So, for example, for many Orthodox Jews and liberal Jews, Reform Jews, secular Jews, right, the more they get to know each other, often, the more disturbed they are by the other. So sometimes getting to know someone else will reduce tension and conflict, but just as frequently it will increase tension and conflict. Anything you want to add to any of that, Dooovid?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this so many times. So just then, from the Jewish perspective, you're like, no, I'm pro-Jewish. I just legitimize that there is a reasonable conflict of interest, and just for dialogue to admit that there's a conflict of interest, and that there is such a thing as Jewish interest and group interest, and there might be other groups, in this case specifically, white Americans or Europeans, that have interests that in some ways are in opposition, and therefore you could have a meaningful conversation about immigration. And my hope was to diminish or minimize um, anti-Semitism by trying to explain why Jews support immigration, or saying like kind of like the Lubavitch Rebbe, you talk about issues, not people. So you'll say, okay, we could agree to disagree about immigration, um, but largely for a lot of Jews, it's a step too far. And then my other point was, uh, it doesn't really benefit to label someone an anti-Semite. So it seems that a lot of Jews in the sphere that do this, they speak to a person and then they like make a determination whether they think they're an anti-Semite or not. Like Charles Moskowitz, he switched times and we stopped streaming. Um, so he stopped inviting me, but it wasn't really going anywhere. But he was also of the same demeanor, where he likes to speak to somebody and then he makes his expert determination whether he thinks the guy's an anti-Semite or not. And almost always he does. I mean, he has the people he'll defend. He'll be like, "Oh, Pat Buchanan's definitely not anti-Semite," or he used to defend E. Michael Jones, but now he feels E. Michael Jones has went beyond the pale, and now he's happy to call E. Michael Jones a anti-Semite. And I said, well, what difference does it make whether he calls him that or not? And how does it promote dialogue as opposed to having a meaningful conversation? Even Adam Green's really the only one I've spoken to. I was on his show actually in December. He invited me on to review this Jewish comedian, former Orthodox Jew, who
Ari
had that.
Ari Shaffir.
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, like Ari Shaffir's negative statements about Jews were relatively a lot worse than Adam Green's. I mean, they're of a different nature, but like, oh, obviously he's a Jew, and it's of a different um, nature. But just the fact that I'm friendly with Adam Green is enough to draw the ire of a lot of Jews, because I mean, generally, I dislike the terminology of anti-Semitism in general. I don't throw the term around. I don't think it's helpful. I think we're in agreement about that. But I've tried to somewhat defend Adam Green, and that's led to a lot of pushback, and whatever. I'm on the show once or twice a year, and then my point that I made to him, well, Adam Green says he's not an anti-Semite. If he was an anti-Semite, why wouldn't he admit it? And I had these conversations with Charles Moskowitz, like Jim Rizzoli, who was substantially more counter-Semitic than most people. But even him, um, I even called him on his phone. He gave me his home number. I called him. We talked, and I mean, he was adamant he's not anti-Semitic. He just is against what Jews in his theory are doing to society and Jewish behavior. And he kind of yelled at me for like half an hour, was like warning me that like he wanted to help me because he felt that Jews were doing such horrible things to society, and if I would just listen to him, then maybe I could prevent the backlash that we're going to face. But I thought it was notably interesting that he adamantly denied being anti-Semitic, and then to put there, well, obviously he's anti-Semitic. So what benefit is it to us to label that or try to convince people? And I've argued so many times in the past that God forbid that it's somewhat of our own making by us insisting that people who are adamant that they're not anti-Semitic are anti-Semitic, that it makes them anti-Semitic. And I've been following the Cozy TV and the Ye is Right and the Dalton Clodfetter, and I think that's probably the best example where we basically convinced Kanye West that he was anti-Semitic when he was adamant he wasn't, and especially Kanye West, that uh, relatively was pretty good with the Jews just a few months ago, and now like the Ye is Right, and you have you Dalton Clodfetter, if you've been following that, going around college campuses with the Ye is Right, and they have these huge protests by Jews, and they adamantly reject that they're anti-Semitic. And so what benefit is it to label them and them as I mean, I could obviously see the reason why Jews do that and say, like, well, clearly what you're saying is a negative portrayal about Jews. Maybe it's false in these various things. So you're anti-Semitic. We're going to label you like that. But I think God forbid that the increase in anti-Semitism is of our own making. I was in the chat on Sula just to finish off earlier today, where they were talking to a semi-popular writer, like an young American who went to serve in the IDF, and he was writing for Israeli blogs fighting anti-Semitism. And it's like, well, is there really twice as many anti-Semites in America as there was 5 years ago, like according to all these new surveys? Or did we just label twice the amount of people anti-Semites? And if we make these definitions, you're really so unreasonable that so many, God willing, that God forbid that no reasonable-minded non-Jew is going to accept this, then then basically everybody's an anti-Semite. So obviously you followed this quite a bit, and I don't know if you agree with me. It's it's like clearly the Jewish organizations are saying that anti-Semitism is like doubled in the last 5 years, and I could see that that might be true in some aspects, but maybe it's just that we labeled twice as many people anti-Semites, and through our own behavior have caused twice as many people to disapprove of our behavior.
Also, Israel has a new government, so I notice on the streets much more tension about Jews. I had this homeless man just screaming at me about how we control all the gold. But the new government of Israel is not a particularly liberal one, and so it is receiving a ton of criticism. Like Israel is just getting relentlessly criticized, and I'm not arguing that it's unfair or arguing that it's fair. I'm just noting the reality. So there's a tremendous amount of criticism of the Jewish state right now, and this will inevitably have real life repercussions for Jews. So I notice when I walk down the street wearing a yarmulke, people are 5-10 times more likely to approach me and engage with me as a Jew when Israel's at war. And so Israel may not be at war right now, but there's certainly a dramatically more tension between the Jewish state and the rest of the world. Any thoughts on the connection between changes in the Israeli government, more tension between the Jewish state and the rest of the world, and its repercussions on Jews just walking down the street wherever they are in the world?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. Like I was in University of Michigan, and the BDS passed, and I was friendly and met a lot of Palestinians and tried to listen to them, hear them out, and God forbid what's happening in Israel is a difficult situation, and within Jewish circles, like the pushing of the new I forget the acronym or the IHR definition of anti-Semitism to include anti-Zionism, but it's definitely a factor, and probably a major factor in the militancy fighting back approach of American Jews, as historically American Jews probably would not have thought it was a wise strategy to fight anti-Semitism and actively you take such a proactive approach, but because we have Israel and Israel's strong, and that's the approach that Israel is taking, and even like I used to talk with this like Charles Moskowitz, and when there be terrorist actions in Israel, that they're not referred to as anti-Semitic because it's part of a war. So if someone's killed, like even pretty regularly, like this week, even like young children were killed in terrorism in Israel, and Charles Moskowitz was always adamant that like they're being killed just because they're Jews, and it's anti-Semitism. And even in Israel, they don't use that terminology and say like, no, I mean, it's part of a war, and there's civilian casualties of a war that's terrorism, but it's not anti-Semitism. And then the conflation to America, there's a lot of complications, and politics, and obviously one of the big factors in increasing anti-Semitism is the influence of Jews on American society, and one of the most notable is the push for support of the U.S. of Israel. And as there's more Arabs and more multiculturalism, more Palestinians in America, people have the face of the other, because you kind of have to pick a side, either Jews or Palestinians. And just quickly, because Liponius in the chat is mentioning, yeah, I did for like 10 weeks mob talk with John Wolf, that I found from your chat that came to my show, and we kind of ran out of steam. And these guys are really big into this guy Gunnar Lindblom, who I'm not too familiar with him, but he's from Detroit, like a minor mobster who spent time in prison and supposedly has a Hollywood series coming out of his book. And it turns out there's a guy in the mob talk genre who I went to high school with, Scott Bernstein, who has like Original Gangsters podcast, and he went to college and got a degree in like mobology and does a lot of research, and had some beef with Gunnar Lindblom. I'm not sure even if I could, or the benefit, but these guys are all hyped. They want you to have Gunnar Lindblom on your show to talk about his book that supposedly coming a Hollywood movie.
Okay, so you reduced or quit using marijuana about a year or so ago. How's that going?
Pretty good. I'm basically off of it. I could see I'm more productive. Like, I read, I study. I started doing push-ups. Like today, thank God I did 100 push-ups. Yesterday was the first time I did 100 push-ups since I started working out like 6 months ago. I think like a decade ago, I was able to do, maybe 20 years ago, I did like 100 push-ups, in sets over a day, but the first time in a long time. But yeah, I'm more productive. I read. I started doing like push-ups and exercise, and just cleaning. Listing more things on eBay. So definitely better that I was off of it. I'm still probably largely depressed, and understanding why I did it for so long, but glad I kicked it, and definitely thanks to Luke for always encouraging me in that direction.
Yeah, definitely encourage that for anyone, though understanding that there are exceptional cases. So I'm not going to make any blanket statements. I'm sure some individuals are better off with if they've got terminal cancer or something, or certain individuals, it's I'm sure marijuana helps them, but for many other people, it has a deleterious effect on their life. And what about getting back to synagogue? Have you stepped back into shul?
No, I mean, and I'm kind of paranoid, like about like, God forbid, like the rising anti-Semitism that I feel excluded. Like I don't feel like an insider, and like as the Jewish community becomes more suspicious of outsiders, it it feels like I don't really want to bear that suspicion. And even just here, like just streaming, like like I talked to Adam Green once in the last year. I hardly talk to anybody on the internet. Just but even like high tea, people are like, like Doovid's not even Jewish, and large amounts of suspicion. And so I think with the increased security measures, it kind of scares me out of you wanting to go through the suspicion to be a part of the Jewish community. I started coaching chess again. I feel good about that. I go Friday afternoons to the Detroit Institute of Art and African Americans. So I started doing that regular activity. And you'll feel good about that. It's in public, and it's actually been packed. It's been filling, overfilling the room, like 50 kids, new kids every week. I thought of going to synagogue a few times, but like, God forbid, I'm not sure if you feel like that as a convert, or you're comfortable enough within your Jewish community that, but you're just the huge level of suspicion of outsiders, and it's feel like, oh man, like the increasing anti-Semitism, and do I really want to go through the high levels of suspicion to go to synagogue?
Well, for me, I have various commitments. I mean, nothing prestigious, nothing particularly, upfront and, vitally important, but I have various volunteer commitments, which keeps me pretty deeply engaged with the Jewish communities. So I've found, volunteering in a very modest, low-key, unprestigious, elementary way, but just taking on some commitments to help out in the community is really helped plug me in, because I think I'm a lot like you in that my natural trajectory is towards isolation, which is not good for me. And so I have to work hard to overcome my own inertia and tendencies towards isolation and, self-doubt and self-loathing. So if I just, follow my inclinations, I isolate, I self-doubt, and I self-loathe. So I have to, actively be doing things with other people and taking on commitments with other people to keep myself out of that negative downward spiral. Anything you want to add on this topic?
Yeah, I agree. I think I could. I'm pretty I feel relatively confident in my position in the Jewish community. I'm not, saying that I'm still on the email list of my local, Young Israel, and I can't imagine that they would, I'd knock on the door if I don't know what. I used to know the combination lock outside, but presumably they change it every so often. But I'm pretty sure they would probably let me in, and the majority of people would be relatively friendly of me. But it's more paranoia. Volunteering coaching chess makes me feel good and a part of things. It's unclear exactly how I would volunteer in the Jewish community, and I'm not sure if you feel it's in doing menial tasks. So if I was trying to do something volunteering, um, I would probably have to perform menial tasks. I'm not sure how meaningful I would feel about that, or through donations. And even so okay, like I'm going to go to my local Young Israel. So there's really no excuse for me not to be a full paying member. So I mean, they're the suspicion. So like the best way for me to you know avoid any suspicion would be to be a full paying member. But it's expensive. I think it's like $1,300 a year or something. I mean, they might give me a discount, and they'd probably, the charter, they'd let me go there even though I didn't pay. And if I told them my situation, maybe they'd let me off for like $650 a year. But thinking like, is it really worth the money for me to pay like $1,300 a year to go to Minion on Sabbath to be like a full-fledged member? And I don't know if you pay full membership or if you go to the type Minion that has full membership. And if you kind of agree that you could feel part of it by doing menial tasks or volunteering, but you're really within the Jewish community, you really feel part of it through extended family connections, or we've talked at length in the past of doing for the community. But the most common thing to do for the community is pay and donate money. And I'm sure there in Hollywood, it's probably expensive. If it's $1,300 for Young Israel in Metro Detroit, I don't know, it might be $5,000 for Young Israel in Hollywood.
Yeah, it's synagogue membership is around $2,000 to $3,000 a year. So sometimes I've paid full membership. Other times I've paid half membership. So sometimes I've paid more than full membership. So it's varied. But the Jewish way of life is definitely not an easy or an inexpensive one. So where did you get the strength to do all these streams on your library? It takes a lot of energy, a lot of strength to do live streams. So where did it come from?
I was just getting out of it. I wasn't doing anything besides week in review. My numbers on my channel were decreasing. I wasn't even hitting like the 4,000 watch hours of a year. And I wanted to do something. So one of the things I get asked most often are for book recommendations. So I just came up first with the idea to do books that changed my life, and I did first stream on that, and it got decent viewership. So I thought, like, I'll do a weekly tour of my library where I'll just go over and talk about the books on my shelf. And so I got I was getting, over 100 views. Some of them even got, a few of them got over 500 views. I got a handful of super chats, some activity in the chat. So I kept on doing it, Wednesday and I realized for streaming, like you got to do it regularly. So thank God, Jennifer, Week in Review, we've been doing that over 3 years. So you're just keeping my imprint and, you get, 10, average maybe 10, 15 viewers and, you'd have a little bit of a community from doing it regularly. So I knew I had to do something. And so that's what I came up with, Tour of My Library. But it's coming to an end. Thank God I have enough books. And it was pretty meaningful for me to just, going through memory row. I'm trying to forward some research. I want to publish. I want to start writing. I'm actually going to try to write an essay this week. If it's interesting to you, I'll forward on what I call high or low birth. I use the expression, referring to the status of birth and one's parental upbringing, and the effect towards different aspects of life from Judaic and other perspectives. But I want to take a more proactive approach to life, and I'm an accomplishment-driven person. And I guess thank God for you. You started that accomplishment in writing and already published numerous books before you reached the age that I'm turning 45. But yeah, I'm trying to take a proactive approach. I want to write a book. I want to be a regular author. I bought Dooovid.com. I invested some money into myself. I bought a year's subscription of StreamYards. I bought Dooovid.com and put my blog on my own webpage. And so probably next week when I finish the tour of my library, I'm going to try to keep it going with a regular weekly stream because if you don't, you got to be there. You got to come up with something. So hopefully I'll be able to come up with something. So thank God it kept me going for about 3 months to do the tour of my library.
And what about getting out into the world in person, say, aside from Jewish things, but just getting more social or more out and about in the wider community?
Nothing. So, I'm working for my parents and, a little property management and my eBay business. It's going good enough. Like I just filed my taxes this week. So it doesn't involve much socialization. So about 4 months ago, they started chess back in Detroit, and that's somewhat prestigious. I'm coaching, mostly African Americans in Detroit, but it's at the museum. My mother was the lawyer for the museum, and I felt good about that. I feel like I'm doing something useful. Um, I feel like I'm valued. I go there. Kids call me coach. Like African American, like 10-year-old Detroiters that come in there and like, hey, coach, Coach Dave, and a lot of them are excited because they like chess, and I'm a pretty good chess coach and have relatively pretty good credentials at chess. I'm a former junior state champion in Michigan, but I haven't came up with something else to do. Like I'm too old to really do something new. I can't imagine that I would um, what I would pick up and do, employment wise. I mean, I could obviously apply for like full time work. I might be able to find employment doing something, but thank God I'm self sufficient with my own part time employment, and I go to engineering conferences. I mean, ironic. I don't. It's probably not worth disclosing too much personal information.
No, don't damage your own well being. But go ahead.
My brother converted to Christianity in the last year.
Wow.
And I mean, my brother's we're a little distant, but I mean, he's a good guy, and he suffered a divorce, and he has a child, and he was feeling lonely, and then he had a girlfriend who passed away, and he didn't talk to me about it. I was shocked. Like if like I'm kind of distant from my brother. I wouldn't even known he got divorced if my mom hadn't told me. He wouldn't have reached out. But he converted to Christianity, and he was never into Judaism. I can't imagine he would have become like a Bolshevik. He married He's got a half Jewish, daughter from a non-Jewish wife. But it was probably loneliness, and he fell into a community at a church and converted to Christianity. And I don't see myself doing something like that. Like my dad plays bridge, so like I play chess, and I can't imagine though I'd pick up a new activity. So I'd probably be more likely to either get re-involved in Judaism. It's just tough. Like the downtown synagogue, um, they also start kicking up the money. Like they went liberal, but now it's like $150 a month. Like if I started trying to go back there, and I don't know if it's worth it. And like definitely with their liberal politics or the community. So it's tough. I would probably like you. Um, probably go all in on the Jewish community. I could probably also, go back into like Hinduism, the Hare Krishna. I think I have a pretty good, reputation with the temple and the community. I'm still friends with like hundreds of people from that community in Metro Detroit on Facebook. So I could probably go all in either Judaism or Hinduism. But now that I'm not smoking marijuana, I've gotten really into scholarship, and I was actually talking to Adam Green about that, and I said I credit the rabbis completely in my yeshiva education. Like I spend 10 hours a day reading. Like I started writing and blogging. I'm trying to write a book, and I don't study too much Jewish topics, but it was definitely my yeshiva experience in Israel that gave me the discipline to read for 10 hours a day. So I think I'm more likely to become reclusive, but I also think I'm onto something. I feel like I've been studying for decades now and just doing like the tour of my library, like 20 episodes. Like I've read a lot of books. I know a lot about a lot of subjects. So, hopefully I'll be able to put something out there and, garner some sort of audience, at least, maybe in the likes that you have, or, thank God I found Jennifer, and we've had 3 years now of a mildly successful micro streaming week in review.
What do you think your brother benefited? What did he get out of converting to Christianity? How would you, understand the appeal for someone like him?
I spoke to him recently about it, and I think it was more emotional and community. Like I'm unclear if he had some sort of like he really believed it. I think maybe God forbid. My brother's a good guy. I don't want to say anything bad about him, but he fell into a dark period, midlife crisis, divorce, and then God forbid, a death of his girlfriend after divorce through cancer. God forbid. I met her, a good woman, and so he just fell into community. He started going to community, to a church, because I guess it was a woman he was dating, went to the church, and he liked the community, but it was a church, so it wasn't really kind of like a uh, non-sectarian group of friends. It was a church, and the pastor, and he liked them, and they converted him to Christianity and joined. So it's kind of like synagogue, like presumably if you weren't Jewish, you would probably lose most of your Jewish friends. Like you'd be like, no, I mean, we like you, Luke, but you have to be an Orthodox Jew. Like our friendships would fall apart if you were no longer an Orthodox Jew. And so it was probably like that for my brother. He just needed to be part of something. And there was a congregation of Christians that were there for him at the time. And it was meaningful enough to him that he converted to Christianity because of it.
Did he ever spend time in Orthodox Judaism?
No, never, not once. He never even asked me about it. Like after I went to Israel, I spent a long time in Israel and New York, and I mean, I could see from his perspective, even my parents' perspective in Metro Detroit, that you have to consider yourself like crazy to become an Orthodox Jew. I mean, I went to Israel, and then after I went to New York, but there's only a few thousand Orthodox Jews in Metro Detroit, and they're in Oak Park, so to say, like the poorest of all the Jewish neighborhoods. That's almost completely African American, and from some reasonable perspective, I could see that he never even seriously considered Judaism, and then maybe also like a logical, like, he's a half Jew, or maybe he saw my own failure in it to say, look, my brother tried this, and I don't see that worked out that good for him, that he even seriously looked into it.
Now, what do you think that this Sabbath here in Pico-Robertson, West Los Angeles, when it comes to Haredi Jews, do you think 100% of them will show up like normal to synagogue? When it comes to modern Orthodox, what would you say, 90%, 80%? Not Orthodox Jews, do you think synagogue attendance will be down 50%? Or what do you think will be the effect of the shooting of these two Orthodox Jewish men if they don't find the shooter in the next 20 hours? What do you think the effect will be on synagogue attendance in West Los Angeles, Beverly Hills this Sabbath?
Well, I mean, we've discussed this in the past, and I lived in Hasidic, Brooklyn for years, and I mean, generally Jews are high authority people, Orthodox Jews, and listen to the leadership. I mean, there might be some dissent. So if there's actually some sort of security risk, and they put out notes like "Don't come to synagogue," but otherwise, I would assume most Jews that go to synagogue are going to go to synagogue. I can't imagine less than like 10% of Jews would not go to synagogue. If you go to Minyan every morning, you're not going to not go to Minyan tomorrow morning because of the shooting. And I mean, God forbid, if you follow the Holocaust and various things, I would guess that would probably be the case, even if it got a lot worse. Even if your own synagogue, even if people were getting shot like on a regular basis, I think to a certain extent that's part of Orthodoxy. Like, people are still gonna go, and if you've been playing both sides, but most Orthodox Jews, they're all in on Judaism. And even at this point, if you live in the Jewish community, there's not really much you could do about rising anti-Semitism. Like, I went to public school, like, I'm only a half Jew. Versus if you're an Orthodox Jew, that's all and with rising anti-Semitism, what are you going to do? You're going to pick up and now try to blend in and assimilate among non-Jews. So I think it's unlikely that I mean, God forbid it creates a bad situation, because when we first started talking about this, and anti-Semitism at that point was pretty much a non-thing. It was similar to what it was today, but in terms of being scared as a Jew or violence towards Jews, or the level that say it's at today. But I said that if America declines, and mostly economic decline, that as Jews we're the most likely target. And I was telling you that when we first started talking, when we weren't really targets. But I think that's the unfortunate aspect. That's a true fear of most Jews, that rising anti-Semitism or not, it's more related to the decline of America. And as America declines and bad things start happening, us as Jews are relatively one of the bigger targets. But I don't know if you agree with my assessment that if you go to Minyan, unless the rabbi and the police tell you not to go, I think most people are going to keep on going.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I've just got an open mind. So
I lived in Borough Park when there were riots.
Yeah.
There were minor riots with the police. There were minor instances of, anti-Semitism. Even in Israel, I was there when the Sabara, suicide bombing happened that killed tens of people. I think it was the Sabara one. I was there when one of those major suicide bombings happened right there on Ben Yehuda. It wasn't far from where I was in yeshiva. It was but Orthodox Jews, we go on. That's what we do. Unless the rabbis send out a message that don't go to synagogue, or there's some police type thing, active shooter, I don't think any level of danger. And I think, God forbid, if you read your Holocaust history, and we've had this debate many times, where I think that's part of Orthodox strategy, is that we just keep doing the same thing, and it's not going to deter us, and saying, well, what else are we going to do? you'll say like, unless like someone's going to shoot me on the way to synagogue right now, like I'm going to go. I don't say. I mean, what do you think would happen, even if it, God forbid, it gets worse? I mean, what do you think? Like Jews are all of a sudden going to like assimilate and become irreligious because of that?
No, there are a lot of fewer people wear yarmulkes. People respond to incentives. So some Jews won't take off their yarmulkes, but many will. There will be precautions taken. There will be less, visible participation in Jewish life if you have, a whole string of these shootings. But I'm gonna move on. So thanks for coming back on the show, Dooovid.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I appreciate. I mean, if I could just mention on the point like that, I mean, it could be that it'll be the opposite. It'll be more visual participation and more communal, Judaism, in the sense where if it's like Brooklyn, where you have Shomrim, and the response will not be. I mean, in LA, it might be different. So, like, obviously, Borough Park, where you have so many thousands of Orthodox Jews, but there's not really even a thought to have less visual participation in Judaism. It would be some sort of alternative communal response, which might be the opposite of more, you'll kind of say, in-your-face Judaism, where you're going to have more Jews on the street, more Jews, communal activity, and it's tough to know if God forbid things could escalate here. But pray for the best, and nice talking. Stay safe.
Thanks.
And appreciate talking, and God bless. So pray for you and your community safety.
Thank you, Dooovid. So looking at reporter Lewis Keane, he's got the best coverage overall on this story. Says no one was badly hurt in either shooting, despite both being shot at a close range. The man who was shot today went to davening prayers tonight. So normally on Sabbath in Pico-Robertson, you've got 10,000 Orthodox Jews, walking to synagogue. So this Sabbath, wondering if there'll be 9,000, 8,000, 7,000. The LAPD says it'll have many officers stationed in the area on the Sabbath. So I will report back. All right. Just a few blocks south of this shooting, right? It is the subject of a 2015 ethnographic history of La Cienega Heights, police power, and the production of racial boundaries in La Cienega Heights. Criminology professor Anya Munoz. So about 99% of criminologists seem to be on the left. So Cadillac Corning is a predominantly now working-class Black and Latino immigrant neighborhood. It sits on the edge of the West Los Angeles police jurisdiction, which also includes some of the wealthiest neighborhoods in the country. So the author says, I was struck by how residents, prosecutors, business owners, and police spent entire meetings vehemently complaining about Cadillac Corning, as well as by how they collaborated on repressive strategies. Civilians and law enforcement often conflicted with one another on their assessment of proper tactics in this neighborhood. Residents were often more militaristic than the police. So community group members were not representative of neighborhood residents. Their high levels of formal community involvement made them unique. It's this uniqueness and unrepresentativeness that interested me. Community groups plan to shape the neighborhood in specific ways. They reached out to leaders in local government, the LAPD, to try to control access to the neighborhood, resource distribution, the appearance of the area, and the behavior of residents. So Cadillac Corning consists primarily of 2- and 3-story apartments built in the 1960s.
This nigga is by far one of the best up-and-coming rappers coming from LA right now. If you ain't heard about this nigga yet, you definitely gotta tap in. I ain't on that nigga or nothing though. But anyways, this game doesn't play. They have headlines and multiple stories about them that's basically been with them.
Okay, talking here about the Playboy Gangster Crips. So this neighborhood consists primarily of 2- and 3-story apartment buildings built in the 1960s. Got the occasional single-family home built in the 1920s. Most apartments are surrounded by wrought iron fences, some with spikes pointing inward. They're installed in the 1970s and 80s after the neighborhood became racially integrated. The housing is dense with narrow alleyways between and behind apartment buildings. Parking along both sides of every street essentially creates one-lane roads through the neighborhood. According to the 2010 census, 86% of all occupied housing was renter-occupied units. 16% of residents were white, 18% were black, 60% were Hispanic. The median household income for the 2000 census was $28,000, so a third of families lived below the poverty level. So crossing the street to a surrounding neighborhood is an abrupt change from dense city life to an almost suburban space of trim lawns, ample parking, quiet sidewalks, large houses, which is where you have more of the Jewish community. 2010, 66% of residents in the census tract to the north were white, 10% were black, 9% Asian, 11% Hispanic. In the 2000 census, the median household income was $46,000, with only 9% of families below the poverty level. So the more north you go, the more owner-occupied units, more whites, and higher incomes. The tract to the immediate west, including Beverlywood Estates, is 93% occupied houser ownership, 86% white, 1% black, 6% Asian, 4% Latino. Average household income of $115,000 according to the 2000 census, only 2% of families below poverty level. So in 1997, Cadillac Corning was a model for the SARA model, Scanning, Analysis, Response, and Assessment. SARA model is a problem-solving police method which officers collaborate with neighborhood prosecutors, landlords, and community groups to fight crime, blight, and quality of life offenses. It's now widely used by police departments nationally, and it was developed in this neighborhood just south of the shootings. In 2003, blue sign went up at the intersection of Cadillac Avenue and La Cienega Boulevard. Sign boasted the city seal of Los Angeles, the name La Cienega Heights. So the neighborhood was renamed. They hoped the new name would rehabilitate the neighborhood's status, but the new veneer has not buried a reputation decades in the making. There are still whispers about Cadillac Corning at homeowners association meetings in the surrounding wealthier, whiter, and more Jewish neighborhoods. 30-something white man with dark-rimmed glasses confided to a fellow Beverlywood Homeowners Association member, "I drive Cadillac every day. My wife is terrified." Yeah, it is kind of scary driving on Cadillac. Young pantsuit-clad woman gasped in response, "Oh my God, I would be scared too." So the ideal of the single-family home was central to LA's sprawling development. LA was the land where everybody could have a car, where everybody's backyard was assaulted by year-round sunshine. The first houses were built in the Cadillac Corning area in the 1920s. Through the 1930s and 40s, you had Spanish-style homes and duplexes characterized by tile roofs, courtyards, and large glass windows. Shopping center where a Ross Dress for Less discount store and CVS drugstore now stand. Used to be a dairy farm in the 1950s. So Bill, a Jewish man who lives just south of Cadillac Corning, grew up in the area, graduated from Hamilton High School in 1966. He recalls, "Most of the time I was there as 90% white and about 80% Jewish." Then, when the neighborhood became racially integrated, property management companies began accepting Section 8 renters, meaning people entitled to government low-income housing assistance. Rental prices decreased. Tenants stayed for shorter periods of time. Lower-income renters with a shorter tenure, right, were more trouble. So when the big management companies started to purchase the buildings, take them over, there just seemed to be a shift in the type of person you'd see living in the neighborhood. So the demographic change was from dominantly Jewish to African American. During World War II, employment in the defense industry brought large numbers of African Americans to Los Angeles. And you had racially restrictive housing covenants to maintain neighborhood stability up through the 1950s, and African Americans until the 60s were largely confined to the southern part of Los Angeles. After World War II, you had Jews moving into Los Angeles in large numbers. They were frequently shut out from the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant downtown elite by a wave of anti-Semitism in the 1920s, but they were able to enter retail, Hollywood, and West Side real estate. Jewish elites formed a West Side power center around Century City, so just west of Cadillac Corning. Hamilton High School opened in 1931. Until the mid-1960s, Hamilton and its surrounding neighborhoods was overwhelmingly white, Jewish, and upper middle class. Then the LAUSD, the Los Angeles Unified School District, adopted an open school transfer policy for racial integration purposes in 1954. The open school transfer policy allowed students to enroll in schools outside of their neighborhood if space was available. Not until mid-1960s, the LA School Board began issuing open transfer permits to black students. So Hamilton High School was central to integration struggles on the west side of Los Angeles. Jewish and black groups formed uneasy coalitions to end school, housing, and employment segregation and police brutality. In the wake of World War II, the Holocaust, the Red Scare, black and Jewish organizations allied to challenge institutional anti-Semitism and anti-black racism. So when Proposition 14 passed in 1964, repealing the Fair Housing Act, only Jews and blacks voted overwhelmingly against the proposition. So only Jews and blacks, wanted government rendering illegal racial discrimination when it comes to housing. Friday, September 20, 1963, members of the Congress of Racial Equality, so local clergy, black and white students from Hamilton and other high schools, began a hunger strike to protest a special report on de facto racial segregation. Many of the white students cited their Jewish background as reasons for speaking up. 17-year-old female Jewish student remarked, "I went to temple first, then I thought I'd do something more for my religion and for my community." So blacks and Jews were pretty much united into the 1960s. Increasing numbers of white parents then sought to transfer their kids out of Hamilton High School, especially to the nearly all-white Culver City High School. In 1968, 8% of Hamilton students were black. By 1970, blacks were 20%. Hamilton's white enrollment dropped 22% from the previous year in 1970. In 1971-72, black enrollment reached 34%. Minority enrollment was 43%. 1972, black-white enrollment was even. And then for the first time, the LA Board of Education banned transfers of minority students into and white students out of Hamilton High School to racially stabilize the school. Only 2 schools were included in the ban. Middle schools were also on the west side of Los Angeles. So school segregation and housing segregation relied upon one another because housing prices were and are tied to the quality of public schooling. Transformation from a white to a black Hamilton High School facilitated a parallel change in this community of La Cienega Heights. So one white parent moving from the area warned, when the school goes all black, then the neighborhood goes all black. So in 1960, this neighborhood was 99.6% white. In 1970, it was 98% white. 1980, it was 25% white, 60% black, 9% Latino. The census tract to the north was 72% white. In 1973, the Los Angeles Times issued a 5-part special series on Hamilton High School. The series portrayed Hamilton so negatively that white transfers surged after it was printed. LA Times then issued a statement highlighting Hamilton's positive attitudes and encouraging white parents to keep their kids at the school. First article was titled, "Boredom and Tension Replace the Golden Age." So apparently Hamilton used to be a prestigious school and then it got wrecked. Once it was the very image of an all-American high school on the suburban fringes of Los Angeles. Now it is an urban high school with all the pressures and troubles which accompany that change in status. Apartment houses and homes surround the rear and 2 sides of the 21-acre campus. Some veteran members of the faculty look yearningly back on that period, call it Hamilton's golden age. Their memory is classrooms full of parent-prodded, anxious-to-succeed students who did not question a teacher's authority, who often bit off more work than they were assigned. It was an exclusive prep school. After the golden age, white teachers, students, and administration accused black students of bringing violence, drugs, and conflict and militancy to the school. The Los Angeles Times article detailed white student fears. Whites talk in apprehensive tones about being jostled in the halls, not using the bathrooms because they might be beaten up or extorted for loose change by black students. White students tend to shun school dances and athletic events at night, largely because they or their parents fear violence at the hands of blacks. There are white students who stay away from school dances because blacks laugh at the way they dance. One coach, lamenting the problems he has getting some white boys to go out for sports, thinks the youngsters are not only unsure that they can measure up to blacks athletically, they're also fearful of them. So teachers struggled with educating a racially and socioeconomically diverse classroom. One Hamilton teacher commented, "It's not unusual to have a kid who is the son of a doctor, another who's from a family of 7, does not know who his father is, and both these students are in the same class." Teachers complained that students were less willing to take command than in the old days, and that they exhibited more attitude.
In the Heights right now, big old rabbits everywhere. We went from carrying backpacks to crack sacks, homie, within a matter of months.
We wanted the first hood to get the gang injunction back in, what was that, 87?
They actually tried it first on the Primitive Flats in the First Street East Coast.
LA still got a G code. It still comes from the top and simmer on down to our young homies.
Crazy.
Hey, what's going on, guys? It's a beautiful day in West LA. My good people are going to show you around. I hope you guys are going to enjoy this video.
We over here in West Los Angeles, La Cienega Heights. You know, home of the rabbits, Playboy hood.
Whole lot of gang shit, whole lot of enemies. Block I originally grew up on Corner Street, know everything. Corner block, no warning shots. You know, a lot of niggas, different streets. They got Garth, Sherborne, Shenandoah. We on Sheffer right now.
This Stacktonio, 8FS, Playboy gang came out here from Harlem to tap in with the Rabs. When you come in this alley, it's legendary. Even being from New York, I done seen this alley in New York. It's where a lot of the OGs did their music videos and shit. This shit set in stone out here.
Big ass seat, like that.
Yeah, the neighborhood's changed. 1970, Hamilton High School qualified first time as an inner city school. So I got 13 additional teachers, and they got armed security guards. Hamilton administrators started to lock the school's gates during school hours. LAPD cars regularly patrolled the perimeter. As black students entered Hamilton in greater numbers, the school became more militarized. Suspensions and arrests of black students rose steeply. Black students complained they felt as if they were in a prison. Los Angeles Times staff writer recounted the school's daily disciplinary routine. The signal that a security agent is needed is one bell, sounded throughout the school by a control device in the school's main office. One hears it periodically during the day, and it is an ominous sound. Everyone knows there is a problem, maybe trouble. 1978, the LA Unified School District announced that no student could transfer to a school in which the student's racial group made up more than 50% of the enrollment.
Quick right here.
Yeah, that part.
My nigga Baby Creep right here, you know what I'm saying? This the side, you know, we forgot about over here, you know what I'm saying? We forgot about, but you know, we gonna make sure they know about us though, real talk. We gonna make sure they know about us, man, real shit. I go by Big Sad 1900, man, you feel me? This Bedford Street, this the Heights right here, man, between Los Cienega,
That's somebody
Robertson,
black. That's somebody black as a
Cadillac,
motherfucker. I don't know who that is.
Sawyer, everything in between, you feel me?
All right, back to this academic book. By 1984, minorities made up 80% of the Hamilton High School student population. Parents threatened to sue the school district unless they investigated the number of students who had illegally migrated out of Hamilton to schools more west and more white. Parents replied they would just enroll their children in private school rather than return to Hamilton. Jews moved west to gain access to employment and housing. 40 years later, black families moved west into Cadillac Corning for the same reason. And now Cadillac Corning home to recent Latino immigrants in search of the same things. 1980, LA street gangs exploded into public consciousness. Rock cocaine became a big business. During a 1987 court case involving Cadillac Corning residents, an LAPD officer pleaded with the judge, "Can you imagine meeting 15-year-old kids who have $5,000 cash in their back pocket, meeting a high school junior who has the keys to a brand new Mercedes?" Probation officer in the Cadillac Corning area reflected the frustration of the police and city prosecutors with the juvenile system. Try to rehabilitate some of them if you can. I tried it first to help some of the kids. I learned it was wasted effort. Law enforcement officials had been locking up black youth in Cadillac Corning. They argued it had not worked. Probation had not worked either. They wanted a more powerful tool.
Hate it. It ain't too many people around here that like us, but it is what it is. So we ain't tripping, you feel me?
I don't know nobody like us, nigga. Shit.
Hey,
Big
Playboy
badass
is
Playboys.
nothing.
Shit, it's hop or drop around this motherfucker.
Hop
shit.
side or you not
Playboy,
fly.
Nigga, that's it.
All the shit happened that's basically at West LA Division. The highest crime rate happened in Los Cienega Heights. You know, West LA is big. It's pretty big, but we got the highest, crime rate. And just smack dead.
Okay, and this is just about 3 blocks south of the Orthodox Jewish community. Law enforcement had their prayers answered in the form of a gang injunction. So injunctions are civil lawsuits against neighborhoods based on the claim that gang behavior is a nuisance to non-gang involved residents. Injunctions then restrict the movements of those labeled gang members. So if alleged gang members are listed on an injunction, they are not allowed to engage in behavior that is otherwise legal, including but not limited to congregating in groups of 2 or more, standing in public for more than 5 minutes, wearing certain clothes, making certain gestures. They can be arrested if they engage in any of these activities. Alleged gang members can be subjected to enhanced sentences of 10 years upon conviction. Gang injunctions are civil orders. Unless the enjoined are on probation or on parole, they're not entitled to public defenders. They choose to appeal the order. By 2003, 47% of African-American men in Los Angeles County between the ages of 21 and 24 were on the Los Angeles County gang database. So half of African-American kids in LA County between the ages of 21 and 24 were on the gang database. So LA's first gang injunctions were implemented in Cadillac Corning, just about 3 blocks south of where these shootings happened. So it was not the area with the most murders or assaults, but it was a threat to the boundaries of white, middle-class, upper-class Jewish areas. So part of the reason Cadillac Corning was targeted for the injunction is that it threatened geographic, racial, and class separation and control. It threatened the Jewish community. Despite the sanitization of race in gang injunction policy, fear of black men and stereotypes about black families was central to the rationale for the injunction. Race is central in the evidence that was presented to attain the gang injunction. The injunction was meticulously designed to control the movement of black youth by criminalizing activities and behavior that is unremarkable and legal in other jurisdictions. So this injunction shored up racial boundaries, protecting a largely Jewish community. In the 1980s, John, a white man, was a city prosecutor assigned to the West Los Angeles area. He remembers asking West LAPD officers what the worst area in the division was. They took him to the corner of Cadillac Avenue and Corning Street. It was just 2 major streets where all the criminal activity was. It was where all the problems were occurring. Officials knew that where you go when you want to pick up some crimes. If you walked or drove through Cadillac Corning, you'd think the neighborhood just has young black males by the looks of those who dare to walk outside. This police officer characterized black gangs as far more threatening than Latino gangs. They don't even do the things that you'll sometimes see the Mexican gangs do, like play football or have a picnic. They have only one purpose in life: to profit from crime. Like the Mexican gangs, where there is a very strict hierarchy and strict decisions as to who will commit a crime, in the black gangs, there is less respect for that hierarchy, and all the players are scrambling to be the number one guy.
We don't live next door to Shaquille O'Neal, and LeBron don't live down the street. You know what I'm saying? We can walk outside. The nigga that we look up to is the nigga that's getting the money, which is the pimp, the dope dealer. You know what I'm saying? The nigga that got the candy painted Benz and the fat, Cartiers and Rolexes. We looked up to drug dealers and pimps. They trying to, what's that word? That gentrification? I don't know if I said it right. Yeah, but they trying to push us about this bitch, but we ain't going nowhere. You know what I'm saying? They've been trying to do that for 10 years. We ain't going nowhere though. Like the homies gonna always be here. You can go.
Okay, let's watch a little bit of the Jim Bowden, Adam Green debate here. So,
our logic, the way you think, we think differently, and it's a Christian trait.
Isn't logic like a pagan pre-Christian?
No. What do you mean?
Yes, it is.
Pagan.
There was no logic before Christianity?
There could be, and there probably was. But what I'm saying is that Christianity itself has its own logic. It's unique. And I'm simply put to you that it is simply, I'm not trying to complicate the whole issue. I'm just simply trying to say that Christianity is a religion which needs to be preserved in a sense. The loss of it, there's no alternative as I see it, no feasible alternative without Christianity. What do we resort to? Islam. What are the alternatives of no religions as you advocate? To me, that's not an option. So let's get the Christians out the way. What are you left? Stop there.
Would you rather have America
Islam,
be Muslim than atheist?
Islam, look, Islam, Judaism are any theistic rather than nothing, then you. Yes.
Any belief in the God. What's up, Andrew?
Any.
Wait, hold on. Okay. Get off my fucking show, you stupid boomer, wasting our fucking time with this shit. Move to the fucking call-ins. Unbelievable. No, you're out. Kick from the studio. What the fuck was this? Out. You're done. Had to come downstairs and fucking do that shit. Out of here.
Okay, thanks for bogarting the whole fucking stream, Andrew. We appreciate it very much. Jim Bowden has been kicked from the stream. We're going to move to call-ins early, but before we do that, I guess I will continue what I think might be a better representation of Jim's argument.
Okay. Let's get back to the Playboy Gangster Crips hood in West Los Angeles, about 3 or 4 blocks south.
Go all around the world. Home is home, no matter what. You know what I'm saying?
As soon as they get to it with his bitch, got nowhere to go. A nigga coming right here.
They can tear all these buildings down and have motherfucking dirt. A nigga still gonna pull up right here. Like, you know what I'm saying? Nigga, right here is where we gonna be. 2010, my homegirl lost her life. And it's crazy because, just 5 years after, a little boy got killed in the same spot. Like, literally in the same spot. Should be crazy. That shit bad, though, bro. Like, killing the innocent. Like, I'm gonna keep it real. Every nigga right here that game bang, we kind of know what we signed up for. So, like, you know what I'm saying? We know what come with it, jail and death. That's what we signed up for, but motherfucker, we ain't out to kill innocent people, though. Like, let the little kids grow up and live. You know what I'm saying?
People ain't got no aim nowadays. That's what it is. They aim at the wrong shit.
All right, back to this academic book. The greater comfort with Latinos extended beyond gangs into stereotypes about family values, competence, and morality. So this one officer argued that the police ignored black gangs based on assumptions about family structure. Quote, Hispanic gangs come from families with strong family values. You're not supposed to say it, but it was clear that in the black culture, they didn't have that kind of value system that the Hispanic families had. God forbid. And it carried over into the gangs. A lot of times in the early to mid 1980s, the feeling was as bad as it gets. You could call this prejudice, but the black gangs will never get it together. The Hispanic gangs sold more pot. Black gangs were more ruthless. At the time, they were selling crack cocaine, but they were not organized. One person would kill another in a second. There was no respect for hierarchy. Law enforcement rested on their laurels, thinking they would never get really organized because we see in the black community they can't pull their families together. So early on, the police saw the black gangs as a problem, but they did not expect black gangs to be able to run an organized drug operation. So regarding the difference between the Italian mafia, the brown shirts of Nazi Germany, and black gangs, an officer testified, all that is missing is the intelligent gang member who has a head on his shoulders. So according to law enforcement, black gangs were violent, ruthless, savagely aggressive, immoral, and out of control, but they supposedly did not have the smarts that Italian-American gangsters or German Nazis possessed. Law enforcement quickly realized their mistaken assumption about social disorganization, so they tried unsuccessfully to stop the Playboy, what's the name of this group? The Playboy Gangster Crips. Playboy Gangster Crips, the PBG's flourishing drug trade. Los Angeles Times article entitled Drug Peddling Street Gang Holds Neighborhood in Fear mentions only 2 murders. One was the murder of a 14-year-old who was a gang member. The other murder covered was that of the white youth on the motorcycle. So drug buyers have been robbed, raped, or gunned down. Late 1986, a 16-year-old white boy involved in a business misunderstanding with a Playboy gangster drug dealer was killed by a lookout who, upon receiving a signal, stepped out of an apartment building and fired a gun as the youth drove off on his motorcycle. All right, based on a misunderstanding, they murdered a customer. For years, wealthier whites from nearby neighborhoods enjoyed Cadillac Corning as a convenient drug market. But after Cadillac Corning garnered attention when several white drug patrons were robbed and one was murdered. So the realtors in Corning, they weren't able to sell homes. The whole realtors were saying, we're seeing a change. Property values are going up and the street is looking better. Right, that's this area in the last 20 years. I've been in the neighborhood for 3 years. I own 2 buildings. It is up to the landlords to get rid of the neighborhood's crime problem. Landlords need to raise rents, renovate their buildings to get rid of the riffraff. If any other landlords are interested, talk to me after the meeting. So the predominantly white, home-owning, probably largely Jewish group of residents was also concerned about the neighborhood's black youth. Well, Perhaps they're Jewish. I have no idea. They have no respect for cars or anything else. They will not move for cars that come into the intersection. The other day, a car clipped one of the kids. The driver was black. Kid on the skateboard was black, so they laughed it off. Feared that if the driver had been another color, it would not have been settled so easily. Hamilton High students are a reliable topic. Hamilton is essentially a two-track school. Campus consists of the original school and two magnet schools. The two magnets have larger percentages of white students, higher test scores, and better college attendance rates than the predominantly black and Latino original school. The majority of the firepower for the 64 square mile west division of the LAPD is concentrated within the boundaries of Cadillac Corning. Local council office assigns a field deputy to drive through the streets, alleyways of the neighborhood daily to address graffiti. Media reinforce the stigmatization of the neighborhood by referring to Cadillac Corning as a tough pocket that the good forces of gentrification have not been able to revitalize.
Migrating over here, and it was basically a Jewish community. But once they started letting us get access to better living, homie, a lot of our parents migrated over here, and this is how we ended up in these shithole apartments. Ain't no better than South Central, man. You know what I'm saying? You go to South Central, them dudes living in houses. Come over here, man, we got apartments and alleys. We caged up like we in the penitentiary. Well, what happens is they get us fucked up with geographics. Oh, we over here by Los Cienega, we over by Beverly Hills. Okay, this and that. Nah, this ain't no gimmick, homie. This shit was treacherous over here. A lot of our homies migrated off the east side, and how our parents got over here, like I said, was through
Right, back to this academic book. Throughout the early mid-20th century, police in American cities strove to keep their distance from the neighborhoods they policed. Detachment was not only intended as an antidote to corruption, but a way to shield departments from public scrutiny. Professionalization gave the appearance that policing could be scientifically efficient and apolitical, but social unrest, high-profile cases of police brutality, consistently high crime rates were a few factors that sparked misgivings about professionalized policing in the 1970s. So two prominent models for policing emerge: broken windows policing and community policing. They entail distinct roles for community and law enforcement. Community policing involves cooperation between police and residents in the development of crime prevention strategies. Broken windows policing places emphasis on order maintenance by officers with community members in a supporting role. Many urban police officers implement both strategies simultaneously. Practice of broken windows policing relies on a racial ideology that connects the dark, foreign other to unpredictable chaos and criminality. The disorderly people targeted by police are overwhelmingly lower-class Black and Latino who are using public space. So the shoring up of threatened racial lines developed Cadillac Corning as a borderland. Borderlands are places of untamed and destabilizing ambiguity. They are geopolitical spaces in flux. There is a lot at stake, which is why community groups, police, and policymakers dedicate so much time and resources to borderlands. They try to turn upheaval into stasis and reestablish lines, racial lines. The racist police and practices that increased this militarization of Hamilton High School and Cadillac Corning ended up stigmatizing the neighborhood. While police had a monopoly on force, wealthy residents had political connections and resources that even the police did not. The author says, I want people to oppose LA's treatment of youth because they feel it viscerally and ethically, because the knowledge enters them and becomes entwined in their insides, not because investigating murders of youth, locking them up, is getting too costly.
It's on, homie. Homies out here with coupes, cutlasses, Lil Loke out here with the Rancho and the Cadillac bumping Computer Love. His spot, like I said, the spot was right there in the back. So anytime the homie Lil Insane come in that alley playing do, we like kids. It's 1985 is the number. We out here. We hear the big homie giving us money, going to the store, checking the trap, watch the block, who out here, Crashman out here, shit like that. We kids. Big Kurt and Dirk, they was up out of Compton. They the ones taught us the word one time. They came from out of Compton. We didn't know what one time meant. They said you only got one time to run. So this is like 85, 86. They say one time, we running. We was all up in this building getting cracking, homie. These apartments was opened up to us. People opened their homes to us. It was more like a family thing. This is 1985, 86 when all this was up and running. The gang injunction happened in 87 because it got so bad over here with the influx of drugs, you know, people shootings, murders, shooting, a lot of shit was going on. Then my two little homies, Boo and Devin, they got killed right here on this corner. So when that happened, that's when they really kind of like wanted to shut this down, homie. And but that injunction didn't last, but we were still outside. They told us we had to be in the house at 7 o'clock. Yeah, all right. We was outside. We didn't care. But back then.
Okay, so we're getting more information about the shooting suspect. Now we're being told he's an Asian male with a goatee driving a white compact vehicle. So the Los Angeles Jewish community is high on alert following 2 possibly related shootings of Orthodox Jewish men in this neighborhood in the last 24 hours. Okay, first victim was shot in the arm. They're Asian male wearing a black mask, black glasses, black sweater, armed with a 9mm handgun.
And that's when LAPD was treacherous. You know what I mean? They was a gang within themselves, homie. Crash, all these departments, man, was it was a lot of systematic shit that was going on with them. Politics, man, planting guns on homies. You know, drugs, taking our drugs. They used to take us up by Hamilton, strip us out, take our money and tell us to walk back. That's how dirty they was, man. But hey, I could turn the blind eye to corruption. Shit, I was doing wrong. I ain't tripping. So had that little shit. I go make it right back. But this is the stuff that they used to do to us on this block.
Okay, that will do it for now. Take care. Bye-bye.